Now, I decided to tackle this topic because of two reasons. One, I'd actually been mulling it over for quite a while. What happened to the British Royal Navy? Why is the Royal Navy in the state it currently is? What's led us here? Why have we gone from quite a capable, flexible force to being quite such a minority force in some regards in recent times? And how it's happened quite so quickly? Because it really has happened a lot quicker than people presume. I'm usually told by people, oh, no, and it's been since the Cold War. And you sit there and go, actually, when you look at our force strength, yes, we halved by the end of the Cold War, but we've managed to halve, more than half, since then again. And a lot of that's been end-loaded since 2003, 2004, because things have been retired without replacement. They've been gapped. Capability gaps became part of our lexicon. And currently, with all the stuff that's going on, I've been getting a lot of messages on social media asking me, what do I think and what am I going to say, have I done a video on this topic? And I was sort of going, well, I've been writing one for quite a while, but I haven't put it together. I haven't actually recorded it. And at the same time, I was reading this. This is the new book by David Craddock. It's Admiral's Original Bacon. And it's all about him and his involvement in how the Royal Navy and naval technology changed in the early 1900s. Prior to the sort of World War One and during World War One. And it's a really, really good book. It is a really good book. Okay? But reading that, seeing the things he was grappling with, and being told, again, we are facing unprecedented times. The world is changing, technology-wise, faster than ever has before. And I'm sitting there going, it isn't. It isn't. So, the vote is live now for May Patreon topics, if anyone's wondering why that's May as the vote is live now. But on with this discussion. How did the Royal Navy go from the Royal Navy Amphibious Force Comes of Age? That was written in 2018. I mean, literally, in 2018, someone writes a massive thing about the Royal Navy, its amphibious forces coming of age. And when I say someone, I mean the Royal Navy's own news. To 8 years later, 8 years later, Navy Commander, Middle East allies are happy our ships have gone, which came out only a few days before all sorts of interesting strikes started to take place in the Middle East, and operations took place. And that's not what this video is about, so I'm not going to discuss them too further, because they could easily get sidetracked into that. And suddenly everyone's going, where's the Royal Navy? Where are the British ships that are normally here? Where's the protection of our assets? Where's the dependence on our trade? And that's what we're getting into. Trade and goods are a critical part of Britain's economic prosperity, and global trade, movement of those goods, is absolutely essential. And, well, the answer is they don't know. The answer is they really don't know. These things have all disappeared, apparently. Now, because some people are not going to want us hang around for the whole video, I do realise this video is 39 slides, dang near 40 slides long. I don't know how long each slide's going to take. I haven't really timed them. I'm putting this together. But it is a long video. So I have sort of done a sort of prezi answer at this point at the beginning. So if people don't want to watch the whole whatever it ends up being, it could end up being a 200-minute long video. I understand. You might find that topic depressing to go on for that long. I can understand. Trust me, I'll be doing this in parts myself, so whether it gets out on the 4th or not is going to be an interesting thing. The question comes down to risk versus threat management. And during the Cold War, we became very comfortable with confusing the two, to the extent that it was almost a standard that threats were risks and risks were threats, and therefore we just talked about threat management. We talked about the threat, which was the Soviet Union, and everything was about dealing with that principal threat. And this is nothing new, because threats are sexy. Threats are things you can point to. Threats are that nasty person over there. That's easy to point to. That's easy to make the case of funding for. Risks are things like, well, okay, we have have a dependence upon global sea trade, and yeah, if we don't have ships in these key positions, if there's piracy or activities or something which turns up, i.e. a threat which suddenly appears, we need to be there to deal with it immediately. But the trouble is, risks, if there isn't a threat, they can look, well, it's a risk, yes, but that won't happen. Risks are often things which are constants. They are a constant exposure. So, for example, if you're talking about risks and threats in your house, in your home security, risks would be, are my doors locked? Are my windows locked? Do they have locks? If I go, well, no one walks past this house. I live in the middle of nowhere in the countryside. No one ever comes here. It doesn't matter if my door doesn't lock. It's a low threat, so I'm not going to deal with this risk. But realistically, you should still maintain certain levels of safety and security in terms of managing risks, even when there is no threat, because the threat can suddenly appear. You could suddenly have your great Aunt Bertha, with a desire to cook the most disgusting plum biscuits you've ever tasted in your life, want to turn up and bake them in your house. And if you haven't locked that door, she's getting in. Okay? That's a threat you didn't see coming, because usually she lives on the other side of the world. But she came here as a surprise. And you have no protection because you haven't managed your risks. Threats pop up and they increase, they decrease. One of the interesting areas where that isn't always the case is when we talk about cybersecurity. Because usually the threats are quite constant, because the threats could be pretty much anyone. It could be a very small individual, it could be a nation state. And therefore you do the risk management almost constantly in terms of security. But risks versus threat management, these are things which matter. And so a lot of the reason why we've seen the diminution of forces, the dropping down of forces, the cutting of things like escort numbers, and the idea of, we can go with 2 assets for this role, because theoretically, as long as nothing we don't predict arrives, we'll always have them available. Because defence, national security, foreign policy are known to be things which are long-term predictable, and you can you can constantly keep, from 2 units, 1 available. You won't suddenly have to surge one, delay its maintenance and all these things. You won't suddenly have more needs for your single dry dock than you actually are forecasting. No. It's all predictable. Oh, no, we're talking about reality. It isn't. It isn't. But we've allowed ourselves to believe that. There have been many reasons why we've allowed ourselves to believe that. People would use the end of history as a criteria, but I would say the end of history really marks when there's a lessening of threat. We suddenly lost an obvious threat. The Soviet Union disappeared, there was no obvious threat to the Western powers, to NATO. And we got so comfortable with a risk analysis, which was actually a threat analysis, we still kept to the threat analysis, and we're going, we're all fine, it's all going to be peaceful now. There are no threats. There's still a lot of risk. And so, for this, I'm going to be using 1997 as the baseline point. Why? Because I could go back further than 1997. There are papers I can go back to. But if I go back further than 1997, I'm really going back into the Cold War. And people can quite easily make the case, and very rightfully so, the reason the funding was so high was because of the Cold War. That was it. It was the Cold War which was driving up the expenses. And that's not wrong. But there is also this great document. And what I'm going to be doing in this video, as well as talking about documents in terms of slides, I'm actually going to go through the documents as well a bit. I've got it all loaded up and ready to go. See? All of them. All the ones I'm going through are loaded up. I've got Defence Statistics 1997. I've got the Strategic Defence White Paper from 1998. I've got the... the Delivering Security in a Changing World Defence White Paper from 2003. It's always wonderful. Then there's Securing Britain in Age of Uncertainty, the Strategic Defence and Security Review. That is from 2010. And then we've got the National Security and Defence Review, I think, isn't it? That's David Cameron. Yeah, National Security Strategic Defence Review, a secure and prosperous United Kingdom from 2015. And then we've got... The Defence in a Competitive Age, that's from, I think it's from 2021. And now we have got, good lord, so many different things, but so many stuff. The Strategic Defence Review, Making Britain Safer, Secure at Home and Strong Abroad, from 2025. There have been a lot of these in not too long a time. But what you might realise about all of them is they all have snappy titles. Barring this one, which was Defence Statistics. This was a boring one. This is the Doomsday Book of defence when we're talking modern times. This is our baseline point when we start to talk about it. But let's get into that document. Let's talk about some of the slides I've got and the reasons why I've picked those slides out. This is the first one which really interests me. The chart of defence expenditure. If you look at it and really go deep into this chart, you will notice very quickly that it's not predicting a massive drop in spending. Yes, we've dropped below 3%, but we're not that far below 3%, and it's reckoning that from 1998 to 1999. So, in terms of defence spending, it was still pretty darn good. Okay, well, it wasn't the 5% plus peak of 1984 to 85, when we were rectifying a lot of the issues from the Falklands War that had been spotted, and some of the late Cold War stuff, but it wasn't bad either. It wasn't bad either. And the plans for expenditure were quite good. You know, we're talking less than 25 billion, but still fairly decent. Still well above 20 billion. Which for those times was a good amount of money. It was a useful amount of money. And when we consider what that force was buying for us in those days, it was a lot. It was a lot of capability. And by the way, links to all these documents will be down below in the description. If I've forgotten to put them, tell me off. And put a comment on it going, Alex, you forgot. It will have been I've forgotten, because I literally have got them printed as a little Word file to copy and paste across, so I should do it. Now, the baseline again, when we start looking for these, numbers of forces, etc., are quite good. The force strength is quite capable. It's one of the really interesting things when you start to look through here is the capabilities they have and how they've spread them out. And they have spread them out, and they've got comparisons in to compare, so you can draw, a line between things and go, well, this is this force and this is this force. The Royal Navy at this point had 32 submarines in service, of which 4 were Trident Polaris in 1975 and 28 were fleet submarines, SSNs. By 1997, they were down to 15 in service. 3 Trident submarines, because the last Vanguard hadn't ended service, and 12 fleet submarines. Now, interesting enough, today we have 6 fleet submarines in service. And we're going to go through that study over time, as you're going to see they're making cases. But every time they go, they're making a number. They say, no, this is the most cost-efficient number for our needs now. And it's amazing, when you think about it, how quickly this goes up and down. And the reason it goes up and down is because it's a threat analysis rather than a risk analysis. Risk analysis would look at the United Kingdom and look at its global interests in terms of sea lines of communication, in terms of British overseas territories, in terms of alliances, in terms of trading network, and go, well, actually sustaining and maintaining a force of about 12 attack submarines is probably the sensible number, because that's going to give us, using the rule of 3, which I've done a whole video about on my channel, 4 operational, another 4 in working up training light refit, and 4 in possibly in major refit. So we've got plenty of work going through the dockyards to keep them busy and keep them employed and keep them at the sustaining capability. We've got 4 which will be operational to deal with various needs. So if we need a SSN for our carrier battle group, we've got one for that. If we need one to be doing up in the high north of the Arctic, we can have one up there. If we need one to be down around the Falklands, we can have one around there, and we can have another one wandering where we need it. We can visiting Australia. That's what you can do with 12. And usually, of the 4 in that sort of second category, you can usually say roughly 2 are available at short notice should you need to surge your force. Which means you've got flexibility in the force structure. It works. Now, at this point, you have 3 carriers. You peaked at 4 in 1985. But 3 carriers, that usually guarantees 1 available. 3 assault ships, usually guarantees 1 available. No cruisers anymore. But destroyers were at 12, peaked at 15 again in 1985. There's a lot of peaking of the Royal Navy in 1985. But, again, a flexible asset. Kind of like your 12 SSNs. That usually means you have 4 available. So, for a carrier battle group, you will have a couple to pop along with it. And a couple others for other missions. Let's say, going and sitting in the Middle East where there's interesting operations going on. Or maybe off the coast of Cyprus. Or maybe providing air defence for the UK, because we still haven't invested in land-based air defence other than our fighter jets, which we never seem to spend enough money on having enough of as well. So, there are options when you have 12. And let's be honest, the research and cost development for 1 is going to be expensive. Once you build more, it gets cheaper. The last ones are usually the cheapest ones. We'll explain more of that as we get in. And then is 23 frigates by 1997. Those are all Type 22s and Type 23s. Type 23s are coming into service. Still at this point. Type 22s are providing the good stalwarts of defence. And for those who don't realise it, the Type 26 is actually a replacement for the Type 22. This is something which gets fun when you start talking about it, but when you look at the mission and capability spec and you look at the time for development, you realise that the Type 26 is based on Global Combat Ship, is based on Future Combat Ship C1, which was the replacement for the Type 22. That was delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed. Now the Type 26 is replacing the Type 23 in service, but it was supposed to replace the Type 22, and so we weren't supposed to be having such a nadir of frigates. That was why you had 2 classes of frigates, so you'd always have one worked up fully in service, and one sort of either at the beginning of its life or at the end of its life. So you sort of could keep up a constant cycle of force strength. It was a very good idea when it was being carried out for like 5 minutes in the early 1990s. We got mine countermeasures vessels, patrol ships, a lot of those, fixed-wing aircraft, a few, 3 squadrons of those, okay. Helicopters, 15 squadrons of those. Royal Marines have dropped down to 3 commandos. But still, there's quite a lot of capability there. And you can see the rest of the forces are also quite good, and you can even go on to the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. And, oh good lord, do they have a lot of ships then. Survey ships, there were 6 in 1997. There was an ice patrol ship, a support ship, there were 9 tankers, 5 fleet replenishment ships, an aviation training ship, which is only just recently retired, HMS Argus, or RFA Argus. She's been in service for so long, she might as well be HMS, but we'll leave that to one side. Landing ships, 5. And forward repair ships, 1. Wow. There were a lot of ships then. And there was a Royal Marines logistic unit. And there were all sorts of other things. This was quite a comprehensive force in 1997. This is what the government inherited when they came into power in 1997 in terms of flexibility. It was a capable force. And in terms of defence spending, we weren't doing that bad either. We were spending $502 per head. That's per capita, adjusted by the 1990 price index in exchanges in 1996. And that put us behind France on 658 and Norway on 777 and United States on 861, but realistically we weren't that bad, considering what we were doing at the time and the cycles things were going through. We were spending about our weight for what we needed to do. And if you look at the average for NATO, it was 552 per head. The average across Europe, without including America and Canada, was 372. So we were above average for Europe, below average for the whole of NATO. But, that wasn't bad. For what the force we were providing and what we were doing at the time and the operations we were doing at the time, it made sense. And this brings me down to why 1997 is a good year to start off with, and why I'm using it for the baseline before I get into all the others. And trust me, all the others are coming. Well, realistically, that's when this ship comes in. This ship, the lovely HMS Kent, is laid down. And she, along with Portland and St. Albans, I do not know why Microsoft PowerPoint loves to keep correcting St. Albans to St. Alban. I someday will win this argument with it, but we'll see if I manage to win with it now, or if it keeps insisting on us being a red underline. Yes, for a short-term win. But, she's laid down. And please note, these ships are capable assets for their time, and they've got a lot cheaper. If you're adjusting for inflation relative to the cost of when she was being laid down, she comes in at roughly 60 million per unit. Roughly 60 million per unit, those last three. The first had come in at about 130. Actual price is roughly 102 million. But they had dropped down dramatically. And the first one, of course, is usually billed as being 180 because they include tooling. In the cost of the first hull is usually the cost of the tooling and setting up all the machinery and systems to build it in the yard, in the way the British structure it. Because the British usually have a whole program which lumps together the research and development costs and then the construction costs, and that's why we get the figure of £6 billion destroyers for the Type 35s. But when you're talking about actual buying the hulls, you have to take off the research and development cost. You have to remember the first hull is always going to include the cost of the tooling, or the first batch. Sometimes it's spread across the first three if there's a guaranteed free unit order. And then the next batch of free will drop down in price because you're just paying for the units and any fine-tuning in the design which you modify between batch 1 and batch 2. And then usually by batch 3, batch 4, you're just getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, because what you're doing is ordering same again please. And so there's no extra training, there's no design modifications, there's nothing, it's just cheaper. That's the way the British tend to build it. If you've got an ongoing procurement program, that can change, because you could have ongoing changes and developments added in, but the British tend to do batch construction and just, we building our destroyers now, they're built, and then we move on. So it's a slightly different expenditure. People usually ask me, compare it to the Arleigh Burkes, especially when I'm talking about it on social media, and I go, well, there's a different systems with how the Americans are procuring their Burkes, because they've got such an ongoing program, whereas the British basically we're going to just build the destroyers, and then we change over our yards, and then we just build the frigate, and then we change over our yards to build the next class of frigate, and then we change over our yards to build the next destroyer, and that's what we've traditionally done for the last roughly 40 years at this point. And the fact they're still in service is great, because these are light frigate. This is supposed to be the cheap and cheerful frigate to build up numbers and give you extra ASW capability. There were designs of this thing which had no air defense missiles and no gun on them. They were just literally towed sonar arrays. If they hadn't been as well armed as they had been, Britain would have been in real trouble, because these units, originally, there's 16 of them, but then someone had a bright idea of selling 3 to Chile, which I will get into. It was very good economic sense. Long-term operational sense, not so good. In terms of actually having the force strength that you can have more resilience, because those extra units count towards capability, count towards your force generation. And that might you might sit there and go, well, that's free, so that's only 1 unit generated. But actually, no, it's the difference between 13 and 16. And 16 units, I can usually use the rule of 4, and I can usually get about 8 out. I usually have 8 available from 16 because of the forced generation. Sometimes I'll have even more. But yeah, that's why this is a good year to start, because 1997 is also the year the last 3 of these are being laid down, and they are going to be the last 3 frigates Britain builds for a long time. Until the Type 26s and Type 31s are laid down, these were the last frigates built. And there's even a gap between them and the Type 45s, which is an ungodly wide gap. I'll leave that to one side. Now here's some other context for you. Since 1st of May 1997, Britain has had quite a turnover in its senior personnel. We have had 15 Secretaries of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs. Since 2020, that's Secretaries of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs. 14 Secretaries of State for Defence. I was actually surprised when I first did the study of that years ago to find out that we'd had 1 less Defence Secretary than we had Foreign Secretary. My only perspective on that was it's a less high-profile role and it's considered more problematic to be in, so less people were competing for the job in our political system. We've had only 8 Prime Ministers in that time. So the average for a Prime Minister is to have 2 Foreign Secretaries per term and 7 general elections. So the average is 2 Secretary of State for Defence between every general election. Now, that's not always the case. Jeff Hoon, who is centre here, was Secretary of State for Defence for 5 years, 207 days. Ben Wallace for 4 years and 38 days. And Michael Fallon, who's over here, 3 years and 109 days. Those are the 3 longest-serving Defence Secretaries. And when you start putting in the fact that they add up to roughly, and I will say roughly 13 of those 29 years, that suddenly makes you very worried when you realise that for the rest of the 16 years, that accounts to 11 of the Secretary of State Defence. In other words, the standard for Defence Secretaries is not to make a full year, not to make more than a year. In fact, only 6 have made it to more than 1 full year, and 9 have made it to years and have got years in it, and only 6 making it to more than 1 full year of those 9. And usually we're talking that measured in days over a year, not years. It's been a lot. And when you have such a churn at the head of government in the UK, you have a problem. Because every time you have a changeover of the Prime Minister and of the Defence Secretary and the Foreign Secretary, you have a change in foreign policy, you have a change in defence policy, and you have someone coming in wanting to stamp their vision and their experience and their knowledge and their view of the world onto defence. This is one of the problems we have in defence spending in the UK, okay? Because what happens is with this changeover, is when they want a changeover, suddenly everything has to pause, everything has to decide whether it fits their new vision or not, or can it be reshaped to fit their vision? And that means it gets played around with, it gets tinkered with, it gets twisted. And that twisting, that changing, that is when the expense really starts to rise. Rather like on the battlefield, where the thing that will cost the most lives is indecision, not making the wrong decision. If your troops are sat in one place, waiting for you to decide things, that's when they're most likely to get hit by an artillery strike, and you're going to lose a lot of them. So often, making a bad decision is better than making no decision. Well, it's kind of like that with defence procurement, because having something is better than nothing. And so if you're indecisive and you're spending your whole time going, I'm not sure what to get, or I've changed my mind, I want to get this and this, and that's basically what Britain is on, has been on national level when it comes to defence, you end up with nothing getting bought. If you want the really classic example of this, look at the Ajax programme for the British Army. I'm not getting into that on this video, because that would be add another 2 hours onto this topic. But realistically, the Think Defence is a great website and has done a great deep dive into the whole process of how we've ended up where we have with AGX and all the various programs that come before it. And you sit there and look through the programs and you go, but they could have built this and it would have been fine. It wouldn't have been perfect solution to all the problems we faced, but it would have been fine and modifiable. But no, perfection was desired. Perfection to fit the new head's view and vision. Now, I would, at this point, have to give you a bit of a personal history. The only time I got into real trouble during my PhD, and I got called to go and see a senior academic, not my supervisor, was when I went along to a meeting of the UK NDA and I started talking. And I was getting involved in politics, and that was considered a bad thing. And I pointed out that I was already quite involved in politics because my view was that if you wanted to have well-informed national debate about defence and security, then people who study it and who talk to the practitioners and have the time to go and talk to the people who are making decisions need to stand up and do so. It's one of the reasons why I am a contract lecturer. I enjoy it. I like it in a way. It gives me time to go visit different unis and do different work, but rather than a tenure track lecturer, because when you're a tenure track lecturer, there's a lot more worry about you getting involved in these things, and maybe you say something bad, maybe you say something that upsets people, and that causes the university trouble. And I can understand that worry. I can understand it. But in this case, the UK NDA, who are now called Defence, I think it's Defence UK, I think they did go through a point where they're Defence Synergia and all sorts of things. They are an organisation. Their link will also be down below. They spend their entire life focusing on arguing for better spending in defence, for better funding of defence. I would love to say they got the attention they deserve, but whilst they are very vocal and produce well-researched papers, they tend to be not that great at getting the attention they need. And sometimes there was a gentleman who a few years ago was going, "Can you give me an extra penny, Gov?" And that was his great thing he thought would catch on. And I could understand why it did sound catchy. But when you're asking for an extra % of defence spending and asking for defence spending to be increased from 2% to 3%, asking for an extra penny in a pound, it's mathematically correct, but it doesn't quite carry the seriousness of the case which they're asking for. And basically what they were asking for, if we go back to it, was returning to our 1997 baseline of defence spending, or rather 1999 the baseline of defence spending, so roughly 3%. When I don't think Britain would argue that we're spending way too much on defence and we were therefore poor as a nation and weren't able to do everything else we wanted because of it. That wasn't the situation. But yes, there are good people, and get involved in them if you want to. If you want to support UK defence, if you're British and you wish to support it, they are nice people to get involved with. They do activities. They are always putting out papers, and they're always trying to get the defence debate to be properly informed and well informed. So, with that being said, we've now reached the 1998 Strategic Defence and Security Review. I'm going to need something stronger to drink, so if you don't mind, I'm opening up my soft drink of choice, Iron Brew. I'm going to get through probably a lot of cans in this, but it's needed. It's needed. Because, believe it or not, this is not that bad a paper. In fact, the 1998 review is not that bad. It's got some nascent points. It doesn't mention all the points it wants to do, but it's got not that bad a paper. The problem with it is how it was implemented. And this is going to require me to open up that window again and start talking through it. But we're going to do that in sections. We are. Now, before we get too far into this, I should point out that says Strategic Defence Review, and this says Strategic Defence Security Review. Why am I using the Strategic Defence Security Review title when it's Strategic Defence Review? Well, I have a reason it's going to be explained once we get further on, and I'm going to keep pointing back to it. But bear with me. I'm using SDSR for the 1998 one, even though it's SDSR, for a reason, and I'll explain it more as I go through. Not this one, as I go through the whole video. Now, it's hard to understate how important this review was, because the 1998 review was the first major review since the Cold War. At this point, cuts have come in, but they've been piecemeal. They'd all been end of history. They'd all been the threats have changed. They'd all been, we are making this short-term justification. No, this was apparently going to be the first time there's going to be a proper report put through together to properly balance the UK armed forces. That was the argument used for it. And for something which is going to take on such a massive task, it's 62 pages long. 65 according to its page numbers, but 62 in the PDF. And that should worry you immediately. I'm not saying the length of a document directly pertains to to the importance of its subject and the breadth of its subject, but when you're dealing with something like a complete reset of a major nation in terms of its status, in terms of its economics, in terms of everything, it's in... Britain is not low down the list of nations in terms of economic power, in terms of integration into global infrastructure and industry, etc. It's very high up there. A nation with the breadth of people, the breadth of interest, the breadth of connections it does, and you're sort of going, we're going to reset everything from a Cold War program in 62 pages? This has either got to be the most well-written, concise document ever known to mankind. Hang on, it's written by and for politicians. That's unlikely. Sorry. Personal bugbear aside. In my experience with anyone involved in politics, they will never use 2 words when 10 can be made to make it flowery and sound and more impactful. I have a real bugbear about buzzwords. That's going to come up a lot in these paper reviews. There are a lot of them. But when you go through this document, it gets really interesting, because there are some really strong immediate reactions. Now, please note, what I am talking about is the SDSR Review's white paper. That's what we're talking about before we go any further. But the reason it has instantaneous reactions is early drafts of the SDSR are sent to various people to review and react to it. And those people, of course, are the members of the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, the opposition parties at this time. And it's kind of interesting to read their reviews. When we have a look at Maples, who is responding from the Conservatives, nor was it the SDR ever a foreign policy-led review. The government has never published a foreign policy baseline as they promised, not even today. Even the panel of experts set up by the government to advise them has never seen it. If the review had generally been foreign policy-led, it would have had to have made some effort to match capabilities to commitments. There is no attempt in the white paper to do that. And Mr. Campbell, who was the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Menzies Campbell, he did it himself. He didn't pass it on to his defence spokesman, he did it himself. The government's much-anticipated strategic defence review will be memorable for its premature publication, but not, I fear, for the clarity of the foreign policy objectives which the armed forces are being redesigned to support. In a document allegedly foreign policy-driven, the reader requires much diligence to find detailed reference to foreign policy. And, honestly, this is them being kind of polite. The SDSR was a great example of something which was about cutting costs and justifying cutting costs. It really is. And this is the consistent problem Britain has with defence. Our governments like to cut defence funding and have been cutting defence funding for a long time, but they haven't cut defence commitments and they haven't cut foreign policy commitments. And they can't, in some ways. The size of the UK economy, the integration of the UK economy with the global trading network, with these interests, means that we cannot cut it. We cannot cut those commitments, because if we do, we're going to put ourselves in a terrible position. So they've stealth cut them. They've basically cut the systems that do those commitments, and they've pretended to maintain them, and hope no one calls their bluff. It's a classic case of the Emperor's New Clothes. And, well, unfortunately for them, the world does like to start calling people's bluff occasionally. It really does. This has been an ongoing thing since the Strategic Defence Security Review. The more you go into this document, the more you go through it, the worse it really gets. And please do go and read it. As I said, there are links down below. This one is particularly interesting because the new missions are as follows for UK. Peacetime security. This is what the armed forces are supposed to do. Peacetime security. Provide forces needed in peacetime to ensure the protection and security of the United Kingdom, to assist as required with the evacuation of British nationals overseas, and to afford military aid to civil authorities in the United Kingdom, including military aid to the civil power, military aid to other government departments, and military aid to the civil community. B. Security of overseas territories. To provide forces to meet any challenges to the external security of a British overseas territory, including overseas possessions and sovereign base areas, or to assist the civil authorities in meeting a challenge to internal security. An amendment to legislation in due course will formalise the change of title from dependent territories to overseas territories. Because that was the important thing. We changed their title from dependent territories to overseas territories. Defence diplomacy. To provide forces to meet the varied activities undertaken by the Ministry of Defence to dispel hostility, build and maintain trust and assist in the development of democratically accountable armed forces, thereby making a significant contribution to conflict prevention and resolution. Okay. Sounds more like a foreign policy tasking, but okay. Support to wider British interests. Provide in the forces to cover activities to promote British interests, influence and standing abroad. E. Peace support and humanitarian operations. To contribute forces to operations other than war in support of British interests and international order and humanitarian principles, the latter most likely under UN auspices. F. Regional conflict outside the NATO area. To contribute to forces for a regional conflict, but not an attack on a NATO or one of its members, which if unchecked could adversely affect European security, or which could pose a serious threat to British interests elsewhere or to international security. Operations are usually under the auspices of the UN or the Organisation for Security Cooperation in Europe. Okay. G. Regional conflict inside the NATO area. To provide forces needed to respond to a regional crisis or a conflict involving a NATO ally who calls for assistance on Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. H. Strategic attack on NATO. To provide within the expected warning and readiness preparation times the forces required to counter a strategic attack against NATO. What you might realise when you go through that is very quietly independent operations, i.e. operations not involving the British, not involving other powers, are quietly being dropped. Look at it. You've changed overseas territories to dependent territories to overseas territories, and whilst you're meeting their security needs by saying they're no longer trying to make it the case they're no longer dependent, you are doing away one of the key assets since 1982 that had been realised was requiring British independent capability, independent force capability, because that's what had happened in Falklands. Yes, there were offers from allies. Yes, there were various decisions, but there are all sorts of reasons why we couldn't take them. The first, the Americans, offered a carrier. Well, at the point where the initial offer was made, it was going to have to be crewed by us, and we didn't have the crew or structure and couldn't get it into service in time, so there's no point. And later on, when it's offered, it is seen very much as, by the British government, as perceived as coming with strings attached because of the way American shuttle diplomacy had been going, and the way, to be honest, the Secretary of State was trying to push things versus the President. But again, that's off topic for this discussion. But basically, it was turned down because of those reasons. This is very much, we start reading through the phrasing and shaping, this is going, we will not have to do this again. We won't have to do this. The world is now peaceful. We will always fight with other people. We can afford to build our forces and structure our forces in a way that they are dependent upon fighting with other people. Logistically, infrastructurally, organisationally, that is what we're doing. There were people at the time who were very against that idea. And that is one of the reasons why it uses the language it's phrased around. But this is what happens in 1998. 1997, you've got forces which are structured around still maintaining capability of independent operation. These ones, they're now paying lip service to that. And as it goes on, it gets more fun. The Royal Navy... Well, the Royal Navy gets a few paragraphs. It really does. But, interesting enough, the Joint Rapid Response Forces will be available from a pool of service assets. This one, this section comes in. For the Army, this will include 4 High Readiness Brigades. The 3rd Commando Brigade, which is actually part of the Royal Navy. The Royal Marines, part of the Royal Navy, but we'll leave that to one side, Air Manoeuvre Brigade, and 2 Ready Brigades, one each from 1st Armoured and 3rd Mechanised Divisions. The Navy will supply around 20 major warships, including carriers, attack submarines, destroyers, and 22 minor support vessels. The RAF will commit around 110 combat aircraft and 160 other support aircraft. Special Forces will also be available. There will be a dedicated Joint Rapid Reaction Forces HQ, together with nucleus of another. Both will be backed up by medical and logistical chains under Joint Force Logistics Component Headquarters. As a result, the force will be able to support 2 concurrent operations, each including up to 15,000 tri-service personnel. Deficiencies have been identified in supporting Joint Rapid Reaction Forces overseas. These will be remedied by the acquisition of new strategic air and sea lift, and through extra spending on defence medical services, both in frontline units and in Defence Secondary Care Agency. These enhancements are shown under individual service holding headings below. And then you've got the Royal Navy's conventional forces and things going through. The interesting thing is, if we consider what happened with Afghanistan and Iraq and the commitments that came up, this could be argued to be rather persistent, seeing the future. The trouble is, they don't actually retrieve those forces. And that's one of the reasons why you have the issues you have ongoing in Iraq and Afghanistan, which turns that whole period. Because remember, this is 3 years before. Turns that whole period into an ongoing saga of emergency procurements, of cutting usually the Navy and the Air Force and parts of the Army which aren't perceived as being part of the core operation to fund the ongoing commitment, as there's a debate within the Treasury and the Ministry of Defence as to who should be funding these ongoing operations. Whether it should be coming from the Ministry of Defence budget or should be coming from an operations budget maintained by the Treasury. And that is one of the interesting things that happens a lot in the UK, is the debate over where the funding should come from. And that has an impact on the wider force procurement, because if the Ministry of Defence suddenly finds it has to pay for an operation which it wasn't expecting to, because it wasn't expecting this operation to come up with, when it was doing its budget, then it has to go, well, I have to cut something. And usually what it has to cut is the jam tomorrow. Or sometimes it's even the equipment today, and even the promise of the jam tomorrow to replace it. Or usually, to be honest, the phase goes, we cut the equipment today, don't worry, there's going to be jam tomorrow, and then the next cycle they cut the jam tomorrow. So it's a cut of capability completely by, argued to be done by stealth, but rather obviously. And this is something which the 1990 SDR really does set up as an ongoing factor. It's an ongoing scenario. And honestly, it gets worse. But we should probably read the Navy section in detail. In line with the greater emphasis on rapid deployment, the Royal Navy will change its bias from open ocean warfare, as formerly envisaged in the North Atlantic, to force protection and near-coast littoral operations. Shallow water operations in the UK waters will also be given less importance. Oh, isn't that lovely? Warships take, 3-4 years to build and procure integrate? You're usually procuring over a 20-year cycle, but now we don't need warships to fight in the middle of the oceans anymore. No, that's not going to be a problem anymore. We are going to be fighting in littoral waters. The next thing is an absolute nail in the coffin of those who say, well, if Britain could have bought 3 or 4 40,000-ton carriers instead of the Queen Elizabeth class, because that would have been better for Britain, because when we could have forced generation, we would have had more hulls available to generate from. No. The centrepiece of the new strategy of force protection is a planned acquisition of 2 large 40,000-ton aircraft carriers with a complement of up to 50 aircraft and helicopters each. I've said this before, and I'll say this again. The long-term plan discussed in the 1990s, the idea was you would get 2 carriers and 3 LHDs, and these would replace basically Albion and Bulwark eventually, Ocean, Illustrious in her amphibious role, and the carriers in their role. So you basically take 6 ships down to 5, and that would give you 5 flight decks to operate from instead of 4, of which all 5 could take the same aircraft in different numbers, and 3 well decks instead of 2, and it would have been a force a far greater capability of force. Unfortunately, that wasn't to be. It wasn't to be. And so, yeah. this is what we have going on. And it gets no better as you go through it, realistically. The fixed-wing component could be provided by the Joint Strike Fighter, but the MOD is also studying a Marinised Eurofighter 2000, an upgraded Sea Harrier, and other existing US and French naval jets for its future carrier-borne aircraft requirement. 2 new carriers will replace the 3 existing Invincible class light carriers, which will be retained in the meantime. The latter, of only 20,000 tons, can only deploy a maximum of 24 aircraft and helicopters originally designed for anti-submarine warfare operations rather than force projection. They're not wrong. They're not wrong, but the thing is about having 3 aircraft carriers is usually 1 is available. And when you add it in Ocean, and you added in Bulwark and Albion, or Fearless and Intrepid, that gave you a pool of roughly 6 ships, of which usually you would have 2 to 3 available for operations to sort of structure an amphibious force around, structure a carrier task force around, build a whole wider force structure. And that's the thing, numbers are part of Force Generation 2. Going down to 2 aircraft, or 2 such ships, that's great on paper. It's great on paper, because on paper you can look at the maps and you can go, we can do this. But the lessons of Eagle, Ark Royal, and the Audaciouses had often been unavailable. They did do many high-profile things. When they were available, they were really, really useful. But the lesson had been, long-term, you need more assets if you want availability. 3rd Commando Brigade will be retained in its present form. The modernisation amphibious squadron will be continued, the recent addition of the helicopter carrier HMS Ocean, and the construction of 2 replacement landing platform docks, HMS Albion and Bulwark. 10 will be invited for 2 replacement landing ships logistics. A refurbishment of 2 older LSLs has been proved more expensive and time-consuming than originally intended. Oh, that's such a surprise. My dad was involved in some of those. They were really, really time-consuming and expensive. My dad was a naval architect, for those who don't know and haven't watched other videos on this channel. He was involved in quite a lot of the construction of the British ships for many, many years. And as planned, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary will require 2 auxiliary oilers. A 200-bed hospital ship will be procured with provision made for a second. That has never happened. We have been talking about procuring a hospital ship since I don't know when. Britain keeps looking at it. It's always roughly a 200-bed hospital ship. It has never been procured. Almost every single review, they will talk about it as a great humanitarian object. It will be something they will stick up and will use as something which will garner attention on newspapers and give lots of positive articles, and the government sounds so nice. It never gets procured. Ever. It's almost a go-to paragraph in every one of these reviews. There is going to be some mention of a hospital ship. It's never happened. Due to the reduced threat in UK waters and new flexibility in certain deployments, the size of destroyer frigate force will be cut from 35 ships to 32. This will be achieved over the next 3 years by paying off 5 Type 22 frigates, Boxer, Beaver, London, all in 1999, Brave in 2000 and Coventry in 2001, and as previously intended, 1 Type 42 destroyer, HMS Birmingham in 1999, and bringing 3 Type 23 frigates into service over the same period. Oh, happy days. So they're basically paying off 6 ships and replacing them with 3. There will be no further order for Merlin ASW helicopters. The RM will only procure 44 because anti-submarine warfare is so out of fashion these days. And order to fill the gap left by an earlier expected order for 24 Merlins, 10 Lynxes will be upgraded from Mark III to Mark 8 standard. So instead of getting the full structure of 68 Merlin helicopters, which the Royal Navy wanted, and to replace their Sea King fleet, and to provide the airborne early warning helicopters, as well as the ASW helicopters for the wider force, no, that's been shrunk down to 44. But don't worry, we're going to keep the factory busy, because we're going to have them upgrading 10 Lynxes from Mark III to Mark 8 standard. And the MOD remains committed to the Horizon anti-air frigate as a replacement for the Type 42. A future escort is planned to replace the Type 22s and 23s. Okay. The attack submarine fleet will be cut from 12 to 10 with the paying off of HMS Splendid and HMS and when it's due for refit. So instead of giving it a refit, they're going to pay it off. And HMS Spartan in 2006, which had a refit in 1999. Okay, that's Good. All remaining attack submarines will be fitted with conventionally anti-armor cruise missiles. That's fine. They're going to get VLS? No. They fire them through their torpedo tubes, so they have to take them instead of torpedoes, rather than the only 7 as originally planned. And despite the cut in fleet size, 2 further Astute class will be ordered after 2000 to join the 3 already on order, which will start to enter service in 2005. Let's just check that for starters. HMS Astute was laid down in 2001, launched in 2007, and commissioned in 2010. So yeah, there's going to be some delays happening. But don't worry, we're cutting the ships now knowing new boats are coming in. We're cutting these boats now knowing new boats are coming in. We're not waiting till new boats come in. We're not seeing what happens. But it could be really useful if you put Splendid in for its refit and the Spartan, etc., had kept them going a bit longer. If their hulls are good enough that you could keep them going, and submarines do have a hull life, but Splendid, it's a pretty good a pretty good boat. You could have covered some of that gap a bit more. Just a bit more. Due to reduced mine threat in home waters, the mine countermeasures vessels fleet will be increased from a current 19 to only 22 ships, rather than 25 as previously intended. This will be achieved by continuing to commission Sandown MCMVs while paying off 3 Hunt-class ships in 2000. Although the often reviewed fishery protection reform will remain in being, the decision of the Scottish Fishery Protection Agency that it no longer requires a dedicated RN ship means that HMS Orkney will be paid off in 1999. Please note that was a decision of the Scottish Fishery Protection Agency that they no longer required a dedicated Royal Navy ship to support them. They had their own vessels. So next time you hear someone complaining that there's no Royal Navy ships no Royal Navy patrol vessels supporting Scottish fishery protection, just remember, the decision was made back in 1998 and was executed in 1999 and has affected procurement since then. It may need to be changed, but that would admit they need to build more ships, and that would be problematic. Overall, personnel freed from reductions in the fleet will be used to fill gaps elsewhere. However, the net effect of the force change will be a cut of 1,400 posts. I do love that then the assessment is basically calls this an irony because of they had cut the large carriers in '66. But life happens. I presume that was someone having fun. They'd continued the decision to continue the £150 million refit of HMS Spartan at Rosyth Dockyard for only an additional 4 years service life has been subject to criticism by the opposition. Honestly, they needed to retain as many boats as they could. And it seems odd there's no mention of a replacement for the Sea King helicopters in even their command or early warning role, especially when you're now only buying 44 of those units. But guess what? Merlins were used for those roles. It's cuts, and more cuts. But yes, that's the 1998 Strategic Defence and Security Review. It is a telling document, it really is. It really, really is. And the report, well, in summary, as I've mentioned already, but 3rd Commando Brigade to retain the theatre entry capability. They're supposed to retain amphibious capability. The large carriers, the size decided ended up becoming the number of aircraft they wanted. It was realised very quickly that if you're procuring something bigger than a Sea Harrier as your aircraft, you're not going to fit 50 aircraft on the weight they wanted to put them on. Not without producing something which couldn't do what you wanted to do. And their plan at this point was to replace Type 42s unit for unit with the Horizon-class frigate project. And you have to remember, the Horizon-class frigate project, for all its problems, it falls down, when you look at it, the systems, the air defense missiles, the radars, all the things developed, they're all joint programs. They're all some various forms of joint development. There are some differences. The Samson radar is a bit special, but they're all joint programs in some ways. The thing that differs down is when you're talking about the engine design and the hull design and what you want out of the hull and wants of the ship and its ability to self-deploy. That's where you had the big difference, realistically, between Italy, France, and Britain. And that's what ends up causing 90% of the arguments and eventually the breakdown of the whole program, with Britain going its own way. And as I've said before on this channel, realistically, we have to be smarter about joint procurement. What we want to do joint is the expensive things of systems, of missiles, of radars, of these things. If we don't want to fund it all solo, we want to invest in it and develop it joint to pull the costs. That makes sense, and we have similar needs, so it makes sense. What we need to get out of is the idea that we need to make a completely one-size-fits-all solution for all parties. But realistically, if you're going to be domestically building your own ships, does it matter if your ships are different, have a different hull profile, and have a different engine setup than the others? No. Realistically, no. As long as they can still operate and support the systems which are developed jointly, it doesn't need to be. I think the trouble is with the joint projects, especially between multinational joint projects, everyone gets obsessed with getting the same thing, when actually they don't want the same thing. They want the same sensors and the systems and the electronic stuff, which is the expensive part of procurement these days. They want that interoperability. They're prepared to pay. They're building their own ships. Let them, let everyone decide what size ship they want, how many VLS tubes they want, and all these things, because that will allow them to fit it together and make it far more effective. Trying to force everyone to be the same doesn't work. It just breeds problems of either people procure stuff which doesn't fit their needs, or there's antagonism and debate and you end up having to fall apart. Whereas if you go, right then, let's make systems which work together, and then you can procure your own ships, everyone's happy, and everyone can keep their own yards in business. I know. It's a silly idea, but it works. It works. But the 1998 paper survives for about 5 years, and then we have Jeff Hoon's 2003 Network-Enabled Capability. Remember that title. We've had jointry, and now we've had network-enabled capability. You're going to enjoy this one. Now, this white paper, well, it's 28 pages long. 28 pages long. And Jeff Hoon's first paragraph is, throughout this government's time in office, the UK armed forces have consistently risen to the challenges set them, continuing a military tradition of which the whole nation can be proud. This success is no accident. It depends on the ability of our people, properly trained, motivated and equipped, focused and organised on achieving results, and directed by outstanding leaders throughout the chain of command. The British people expect the government to continue to deliver high-quality armed forces capable of responding to uncertainties and threats of today's security environment, and to ensure our servicemen and women receive the level of support they need. The white paper, this white paper, sets out the policy for doing so, building on an expeditionary strategy first set out in the Strategic Defence Review, SDSR, in 1998, and the conclusions reached in the SDR new chapter in 2002, and adapted to reflect operational experience and a changing security environment. Okay, fun times. You have to wait till chapter 3 before you get into what I would call the future requirements of defence, as they title it, but basically any explanation of actually what they're doing and what they're talking about. It's always fun when you sort of go to these topics and you're sort of looking up these papers, and you sit there and go, wow, they take a long time to actually get to talk about what they're supposed to be talking about. They really do. They really do. In this case, Chapter 3, as you can see, is Future Requirements for Defence. Now, the security challenge, setting the scene, all these things, are a lot of very interesting bump and some interesting pictures, and I do love the way they always, in these documents, they spend a lot of time on picture selection. I swear the pictures come in more important than anything else for them. But Chapter 3 Implications for defence. And the opening of this is really quite funny when you start to read the whole document, because it starts off with, the UK will remain actively engaged in potential areas of instability in and around Europe, the Near East, North Africa and the Gulf. But we must extend our ability to project force further afield than the SDR envisaged. In particular, the potential for instability and crisis occurring across sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, and the wider threat from international terrorism will require us both to engage proactively in conflict prevention and be ready to contribute to short notice peace support and counter-terrorism operations. Okay, so if you're expanding your forces, you're going to be sending them further afield. That would usually mean you're increasing the size of your force, aren't you? I would expect you at least to be buying more force enablers like tankers, support ships, base investments in infrastructure, capacity aircraft, etc. Those things to support that. I'm expecting from reading this that I'm going to see some increases in certain areas of defence, at least, if not across the board, as you are expanding your area from the previous one you only worked out in 5 years earlier. The UK will not be able to make a military contribution to the response to every international crisis. Well, we wouldn't expect to. Generally, where we are involved, we will respond in coalitions with other countries. Therefore, we must maintain our existing alliances and develop new partnerships, seek and exploit political and military influence, and ensure access for our force in times of crisis. Oh, I can see where this is going, and you're not funding anything more, are you? Our forces must be equipped and configured to fulfill the requirement identified in the new chapter to protect our citizens at home and counter international terrorism across the globe. We must be more prepared for asymmetric attacks, those avoiding direct conventional conflict, and our military forces by both state and non-state actors, including the employment of WMD delivered through a variety of means. Oh, great. As you go forward and through this document and through this section, you start to realise that once again they're jumping on bandwagons, they're jumping on threats. They're not looking at risks, they're looking at threats. The military tasks to which Ministry of Defence allocates specific forces are air operations to protect UK airspace through radar surveillance and quick reaction alert fighter aircraft. Numbers of the latter were doubled after the new chapter and will be kept at levels commensurate with the threat. Maritime and air operations to deal with threats from renegade shipping. Additional investment has been provided since the new chapter to reduce the response times of the helicopter-borne response forces. Explosive ordnance disposal, including potentially a WMD. Specialised counter-terrorist operations, including hostage release. Operations in Northern Ireland. The armed forces will continue to support the police service for Northern Ireland's PSNI, public order and counter-terrorist operations for as long as they are needed. We will reduce the level of force committed to this task as soon as the improving security situation, capability and confidence of the PSNI allows. Ultimately, our aim is to achieve a situation where an element of our deployable force structure is permanently based in Northern Ireland, just as throughout the rest of the UK. And they're even talking about volunteer civilians, all sorts of things. But what you start to get through when you start looking through this document in detail is there's a lot of words, there's a lot about commitments and interests, and there's a lot about using allies. It's not a lot about force investment. There really isn't. And it gets worse the further you go on. It really does. Especially when we get to the next slide. Delivering security in a changing world. The 2003 paper is a fun one. These come from pages 15 to 18. And when we start to look at this one, Maritime gets this as its paragraph. Our emphasis in the maritime environment is increasingly on delivering effect from sea onto the land, which includes a land attack capability, supporting forces ashore, and on securing access to the theatre of operations and protecting the crucial sea lines of communication from the home base. The new amphibious ships coming into service over the next 2 years, together with existing small aircraft carriers and Tomahawk land attack missiles, offer a versatile capability for projecting land and air power ashore. We're developing the increased use of secure joint sea-based logistics, particularly for operations where host nation support is limited, or where for force protection or political reasons, we would wish to reduce our shore footprint. The introduction of 2 new aircraft carriers with the joint combat aircraft early in the next decade will offer a step increase into in our ability to project air power from the sea. The Type 45 destroyer will enhance and protection of joint and maritime forces and assist force protection. Some of our older vessels contribute less to the pattern of operations that we envisage, and reduction in numbers will be necessary. Remember, this is 2003. Okay? 2003. When we start talking about the Type 45 destroyer, and we are going to be, remember, this is the same year the first steel is cut on HMS Daring, i.e., she won't be launched for another 3 years, she won't be commissioned for another 6. And Dauntless comes in service a year after that, Diamond a year after that, and then we get Dragon in 2012, Defender and Duncan in 2013. So, we are 10 years away from having all 6 of them. 10 years away. And so, yes. This is the reality of it. This is the reality of all that talk. So, after the previous 1,400 reduction in personnel strength, there's now another 1,500 reduced off the Royal Navy. They reduced the Type 45s from 12 to 8 vessels. They've gone, oh, we don't need as many of these. We're still going to get 8. Let's be honest. Even 8 allows for a lot more force generation than 6. 6 is the bare minimum to have 2 available. And 2 operational. 8 gives you some slack in that system to have 2 operational. Usually you're going to have 3 operational and 2 more available out of 8, a force of 8. And that's kind of useful. Reduced force of nuclear attack submarines, dropped from 12 to 8 boats. Again, would be better than we are in now, but still, both of these reductions are based on the world being more peaceful. Reduced force of Type 23 frigates from 16 to 13 vessels by March 2006, and that's on top of the 6 batch Type 22 frigates being retired without replacement since 1999, and there's also going to be more batch 2s lost. At this point, they're selling. One of the things I could have forgiven, if they sold the batch 3 Type 22s, I wouldn't have liked it, but I could understand it. But they're keeping them in because they're a capability which is needed in service. And that tells you something. They are not just replacing those last 4 batch 3 Type 22s with Type 45s. And the Type 40, they're also replacing Type 42s with the Type 45s. So they're replacing 16 ships with 6. Because of their command and control duties, because of their presence duties, because of their status. The Type 22 was always the big the status ship which the British were using when you had the Type 42s, 22s and 23s. The Type 22s were often doing the presence mission and command missions because they had the space and status for that. Theoretically it should have been the 42s, but the 42s suffered from always being perceived as being the cheap destroyer option versus the 82. So yeah, the Royal Navy is losing a lot of ships. A lot of ships. And when you add in 3 Type 23 frigates being sold off, so they're being reduced from 16 as well, that's a big problem. Let's be honest, if we'd had 8 45s and 16 Type 23s, okay, yes, that's only 24 escorts for the last few years. But considering what we've done on 19, having 5 more adds just that extra slack in the system. We would probably still find ways to use them and probably still manage to muck up the infrastructure considering the lack of investment in infrastructure. But we would have had that much capability. And again, 12 down to 8 boats for the SSNs. That's a big drop. Mine countermeasures are now dropping to 16. The Northern Ireland Patrol Fleet is going at this point, so that's 3 more hulls which are going. Rather than being turned into getting patrol boats or you getting other assets for them, they're getting rid of them. When, frankly, that was 3 extra hulls. And the carrier has been purchased, confirmed, but orders allowed delayed till 2008, so 5 years from here, and not to be laid down before 2009. So they've moved it back. Now, admittedly, they hadn't got a settled design at this point because they've been restricting funding, but yeah, it would have been useful. And the three oldest Type 42 destroyers, Cardiff, Newcastle, and Glasgow, are all being retired. So, again, there's a capability being gapped, numbers being gapped. And this adds stresses into the system. It does add stresses into the system. Also, think about it from a personnel retention perspective. If you're cutting this much force, all those positions are also cutting commands at sea, but also cutting senior NCO positions. So suddenly, at every single level in the force structure, you're looking ahead and going, hang on, there's going to be increased competition. So usually when you start asking for volunteer redundancy, you start to lose the people who are worried about their future, i.e. looking forward to their future, and who have the skills where they think they can thrive outside the Navy. And that's not necessarily the people you want to lose. So this is all creating problems for the Navy. And there are so many issues. Also, I would like to point out for the Type 45s, a lot is often made of HMS Daring and the amount of time she spent being repaired, but she was the first in class. Traditionally, what happens is you build a class, you get through, constructing, let's say you're building 12 units, and then almost immediately, the first in class, which was the test bed, remember, where you're testing everything out and you were developing everything on and you were the first to go through production, goes in for a massive refit where you fix everything that you've learned you did wrong in the construction because of the experience you gain constructing the rest of them. Again, look at the history of Royal Navy ships, look at the history of procurement. The more advanced systems got, the more that's happened as a rule. The first in class tends to wait till all the others are in service, and then it gets a big refit. Really big refit. And sometimes you have to do lesser refits to other earlier vessels to bring them up to same standard as the latest examples of them, the ones where you learnt all the lessons and I managed to make everything work. Because of the pressures of operations and the needs of operations, this was put off for HMS Daring. And it built up issues, which then became very costly to rectify, which then meant she was stuck in harbour for a long time, and then she was used basically because, again, they were mucking up other issues of procurement and, parts replacement, as a stores ship and a parts ship for the other vessels. So they would grab stuff, she would be getting ready, then they'd go, well, we've got an emergency commitment, we have to get this ship in operational. We've got that bit there on Daring. Daring's not yet in service, so we'll take it off her, and we'll replace that bit as soon as we can. And you had an ongoing saga. Daring's not a bad ship. Daring is a badly managed ship. But again, it's hard to put the blame on the Ministry of Defence, which is normally what you'll hear. You hear people going, we blame the Ministry of Defence. When the Ministry of Defence is going, we're responding to the politicians. They've said that we're going to they're funding us for these operations. So we go, okay, we've built the force around these operations. Then they want us to do extra operations, which they didn't foresee coming. We don't have the budget for it. And we have to get the money from somewhere. We have to get the operational capability from somewhere. I'm not saying I agree with all decisions of the MOD. I'm just saying keep blaming the MOD or even keep blaming the Treasury is a false premise, because you're blaming the people who are responding to their mission, their statement, directions given them by the governments above. And the governments basically want to save money so they can spend money on things which they see more as vote winners. In turn, they don't see defence as a vote winner. And they don't see security as a vote winner. They see it as a vote loser if it goes wrong, but they see it as a vote winner. They don't see it as a vote winner, so they don't want to spend money on it if they don't have to. And so they want to reduce the spending as much as they can, but they still want to go and do those things, because if they don't do them, that is a vote loser. And so this is the problem. The Ministry of Defence and the Treasury are set up in this constant battle over this, when in reality, they shouldn't. You need directions from above, going, no, this is what we have, and maybe we have a pool of money which we put aside every year, which we might not use, but it is our unexpected operations funding. We have a UOF sitting in a pool, and maybe that money isn't touched for a year because we don't have any operations which aren't expected. That's great, just leave it there. Or maybe it's all used up, and then we have a problem. We also need to budget more for next year. So it's a not. There is not. They keep talking about joint up thinking and joined up operations in terms of defence, but there isn't a lot of joint up thinking when it comes to how defence is run long term in central government in the UK. This has been something which has been getting worse since the end of the Cold War, as defence has been perceived as less and less important. That brings us to the Shameless Book Club. Yeah, it's the Shameless Book Club. Now, this is the point we are roughly 80 minutes into this video, and normally that's about the maximum length I do a video too, because at this point, normally people have stopped watching. They basically, the numbers just go down and down and down. But I'm not going to make this a two-parter. I have multiple other reviews to go through, and frankly, I think this makes more sense as a long video. So thank you for supporting the channel, thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, thank you for everyone who's a patron. As said at the beginning, patron vote for May is open when this goes out, and especially as I'm not quite sure when this will go out. It should be the 4th of March. That's why I've sort of been busting to push it out at, but it's going to be such a long video. How long it's going to take to upload and YouTube is going to take to assess it and be happy with it, and it's touching so many different thorny topics, who knows, but hopefully it goes out on the 4th of March. And thank you for supporting the channel, thank you for making everything possible, thank you for making it possible for me to be the kind of academic I am. Basically, I'm a kind of bit of a unicorn in that I don't have to worry about the traditional source of funding in terms of the grants bodies and the funding councils and all those, because I have you. Because of you supporting my channel, allowing me to put these books out, etc. More are coming on books. More are coming. So it's Christmas, but more are coming. The thing that's holding it up is getting the housework done, and that just keeps being delayed and delayed. And I just have to spend more time doing the house stuff to get the house stuff through. But it will be done. So let's get to SDSR 2010, and this is the first one which actually has both defence and security in the title. Actually. The first one was, of course, the Strategic Defence Review, and then it was Delivering Security in a Changing World, and now it is the Strategic Defence Security Review. And I'd like you to think about the fact that they have so far kept defence and security apart, but they actually do come together. And this is one of those interesting documents. When you start reading it and start reading through it, you go, oh my, oh my, oh my, because this is the most curious justifications for defence cuts I have ever read. Because it starts off with, in an age of uncertainty, as it's part of its title. Now, usually when I'm dealing with uncertainty, I will look for reassurance. I will look for something which is going to provide me with protection or safety. But no, we are still going to do more with less. More with less, which is actually not physically possible, because the ships can only be in one place at a time. So can aircraft, so can an infantryman. They can all only be in one place at a time. And if that time is they need maintenance, or they need medical care, or they need training, then they can't be operational. Otherwise, your training and capabilities are going to suffer, which means your operational abilities are going to suffer longer term. Every time you make these cuts, they can seem so easy and so straightforward on paper, but in reality they have a long-term consequence, because, as I have kept emphasizing, defense, security, these things, they are predictable in terms of risks, they're not predictable in terms of threats. Threats can go up and down. And if you keep planning around threats, every time you've planned for a threat, when it reduces, you suddenly have a threat and another risk, and you're not in the right position, you keep having to shift your force around. Whereas if you plan your force around risks, and also take into account and add some surge for some surplus capacity for dealing with the current threats, you tend to be in a far better position to adapt your forces. But let's consider what the leaders of the coalition government, that was David Cameron as Prime Minister and Nick Clegg as leader of the Liberal Democrats and Deputy Prime Minister, actually wrote. In terms of the Royal Navy, it comes as, we will complete the construction of the 2 large aircraft carriers. The government believes it is right for the United Kingdom to retain, in the long term, the capability that only aircraft carriers can provide, the ability to deploy air power from anywhere in the world without the need for friendly air bases on land. In short term, there are a few circumstances we can envisage where the ability to deploy air power from the sea will be essential. That is why we have reluctantly taken the decision to retire the Harrier aircraft, which has served our country so well. Remember, this is done in 2010. In 2011, Libya happens, but we'll leave that to one side until we get there. But over the longer term, we cannot assume that the basis for land-based aircraft will always be available when and where we need them. That is why we need an operational carrier. But the last government committed to carriers that would have been unable to work properly with our closest military allies. It will take time to rectify this error. They don't. They look at the budget and they go, nope, we can't do that. After using it as a justification for delaying the building them, they decide not to. And by the way, that's fitting them with cats and traps, so making them a Catabar carrier, a catapult and assisted takeoff, barrier assisted recovery carrier, rather than a Stovall carrier, short takeoff, vertical landing carrier, which is what they are. We will fit a catapult to the operational carrier to enable to fly a version of Joint Strike Fighter with longer range and able to carry more weapons. Crucially, that will allow our carrier to operate in tandem with the US and French navies, and for American and French aircraft to operate from our carrier and vice versa, and retain the Royal Marines Brigade and an effective amphibious capability. Please note, actually, if they had gone for the F-35C, the current dual buy of F-35B and A would not be necessary, because the F-35C could easily have been fitted to do the role, and would actually possibly be better than the A. For Britain's needs. It certainly would have been rarer. We are procuring a fleet of the most capable nuclear-powered hunter-killer submarines anywhere in the world. They are able to operate in secret across the world's oceans, fire Tomahawk cruise missiles on targets on land, detect and attack submarines and ships to keep the sea lanes open, protect the nuclear deterrent and feed strategic intelligence back to UK. Our military force across the world. We will complete the production of the 6 Type 45 destroyers at $1 billion a ship. They don't cost $1 billion a ship. The most expensive one, which was HMS Daring, cost £633 million per unit to build. That is the development costs included in them. They got cheaper after Daring. Remember, because the costs of all the what do you call them? The tools and all the various systems which are used to build them in the yard, all the patterns, etc., are actually included in the cost of the first unit. So, yeah. Thank you. You're saving money. It's already been cut from 12 to 8. Now you're cutting it from 8 to 6. One of the most effective multi-role destroyers in the world, but we're emphasizing its cost. We'll embark on a new program of less expensive modern frigates, more flexible and better able to take on today's naval tasks of tackling drug trafficking, piracy and counterterrorism, not anti-submarine warfare. Please note that's not mentioned in it. This, of course, is what gives rise to various ideas, which eventually lead to the Type 26 procurement being split and there being Type 31s added in. The idea of we don't need ASW warfare anymore because we're not doing peer-on-peer conflict. That's so gauche. That's so behind us. Peer-on-peer conflict? That's not going to happen. That's not a problem anymore. We will retain and renew our independent nuclear deterrent, the United Kingdom's ultimate insurance policy in this age of uncertainty. As a result of our value for money review, we will reduce the number of operational launch tubes on the submarines from 12 to 8, and the number of warheads from 48 to 40, in line with our commitment vigorously to pursue multilateral global disarmament. This will help reduce costs by $750 million over the period of the spending review, and by $3.2 billion over the next 10 years. Now, please note, this has caused absolutely no one else to reduce their nuclear weapon acquisition. No one else has cut their stars. Look at Britain gone, that's a shining light, we'll follow on that. Not at all. It has saved money, but it hasn't made the world any more secure. In fact, arguably, it's made people question the viability of our own nuclear deterrent now. So that could arguably be making the world less secure. But this was what they were doing. Trust me, I apologise now, but I will get more sarcastic and possibly more ranty the closer we get to the current day one, because the 1998 one started off with some connection with reality, and they've got further and further from it as we've gone on. And it gets more and more bad for my blood pressure. Which is normally not a problem, but when I'm doing this topic, it can get problematic. And the decision to start building the submarines is required around 2016. It is right that the United Kingdom should retain a credible, continuous, and effective minimum nuclear deterrent for as long as the global security situation makes that necessary. Remember, the Liberal Democrats had been campaigning against retaining anything, or had put forward the idea of maybe we just have one boat and we only send it to sea when we need to do deterrence. The whole point of continuous at-sea deterrence, the reason you want one constantly to sea, is because if you're sending it to sea, that's going to raise tensions. Okay? Let's say you've got a fraught international scenario and you're going, it's getting risky, send out the boat. That's going to cause problems. Whereas if the boat is already at sea and you just keep the boats constantly at sea and that's part of your standard operating procedure, that's suddenly you're not doing something which is adding to the tension. That's just you carrying on normal operations. So one creates a force escalation, the other creates a ceiling of escalation. Now, again, as I've said before on this channel, I don't mind what your view is on nuclear deterrence and whether to have it or not have it. But if you have it, you want the version which is survivable and going to provide a ceiling and a credible deterrence, not something which is going to possibly be not survivable because it's peer-side most of the time, or is going to actually raise the tensions. You don't want that as your options. So I don't mind which way you go, not having it or having it, but if you're going to have it, do it properly. Don't muck about with it. Do it properly. And it's interesting, though, again, with the nuclear deterrent, it's 4 boats to guarantee 1 at sea. This is the fun thing when people quote to me the rule of 3. Okay, the rule of 3 provides usually 1 at sea. Usually provides 1 at sea and 1 at sea. Yes, but 4 guarantees 1 at sea, with 1 at sea and 1 usually available on short notice to cover the 1 at sea should there be an issue. That's why you have 4. So, if we can do that for the ballistic missile submarines, surely we should understand that for every other part of defence, i.e. if we need these things and we need to be doing regular maintenance and regular cycles, and, believe it or not, the at-sea deterrents, the ballistic missile submarines, are the most constant thing, because they are a constant cycle of units going through that process. So they're the most predictable, and we have 4 of those, whereas things like aircraft carriers and escort numbers, etc., we have less resilience in the numbers, and they are the less predictable parts of defence in terms of their operational requirements. Because you don't send a ballistic missile submarine off racing around the world to deal with, let's say, a problem in the South Atlantic. You just don't. It's not what's it's useful. And I actually finished this whole foreword off with, all too often we focus on military hardware. But we know from our many visits to Afghanistan and military units around the country that ultimately it is our people that really make the difference. As a country, we have failed to give them the support they deserve. We are putting that right, even in the very difficult economic circumstances we face. We will renew the military covenant, the vital contract between armed forces, their families, our veterans, and the country they sacrifice so much to keep safe. Each and every one of us has a responsibility to do more to support the men and women of our armed forces. We must never send our soldiers, sailors, airmen into battle without the right equipment, the right training, or the right support. The objective has been a fundamental guiding principle of this review, and it's one this government will remain absolutely committed to. How'd I said that with a straight face? I will never know. But they did. The thing is, every single government writes that in every single one of these papers. That the armed forces have been let down by previous governments, but they will rectify this. It's kind of like hospital ships. It just comes up every single time in some way or other. And you just go, okay, so basically you're telling us that everyone else was a sod before you and you're not going to be? Yeah, am I likely to believe that? But anyway, on with the SDSR 2010. And this has some really cool graphics in it. And I'm going to say, as they go further, the graphics do get more interesting. It's almost as if they spend even more time on the graphics than the actual content. And this is now Future Force 2010. We've had Network Force, we've had various variations of Future Force. We've got even more to come, but this is now Future Force. And the first thing you notice about this is numbers aren't there. There aren't numbers. In fact, this is a 2-part graphic because there's some writing underneath it, but that's going to be in the next slide because you want to see that as the writing intended. Now in this, the Future Force 2020 is structured into readiness, from extended readiness up to deployed force. Deployed force, maritime circumstance, would include surface ships, frigates and destroyers, and submarines, Trident, and the attack subs. I do love the fact that the aircraft are all listed as combat ready fast jets, combat ready fast jets, combat ready fast jets, combat ready. You have combat ready fast jets at every single level. That's your entire air force. There's no mention of tankers or support aircraft, electronic warfare, any of the other aircraft. No, they're all combat ready fast jets. It's like someone's just trying to repeat a mantra over and over again. We have, in terms of deployed force, for the land forces, we got special forces, explosive ordnance disposal, and CBRN defense units. They're on deployed force constantly. Then one-offs. We've got, in terms of high readiness, we've got a maritime task group or of an aircraft carrier, amphibious ships, submarines, mine hunters, frigates and destroyers. Land forces, that's going to be special forces, the 16 Air Assault Brigade and the 3rd Commando Brigade, and combat ready fast jets. Enduring readiness, I presume, or enduring force, surface ships, frigates and destroyers, a multi-role brigade, and combat ready fast jets. Someone's really trying to emphasize something. Lower readiness, we'll have surface ships again, frigates and destroyers, again in all levels of that, frigates and destroyers, multi-role brigades, and combat ready fast jets. And then extended readiness, a 2nd aircraft carrier, a 2nd amphibious ship, and land force elements. Interestingly enough, they have no combat ready fast jets in extended readiness. I presume because you can't claim they're combat ready if they're in extended readiness. I'm not sure. But you have none there. And on below this, you have allies and partners supporting us. And the allies and partners specifically are quite heavily involved in these areas of grey in this force structure, without telling us who they are. Perhaps they're America, perhaps they're Denmark. We don't know. We don't know. But again, there is a lot of dependence going on upon allies here, and there's also a lot of dependence on combat ready fast jets. Sorry, I will stop it. Every time I read through this one in 2010, and hey, also, please note, this is Future Force 2020. So this is them not planning for now, this is them planning for tomorrow. This is the force they want to achieve in 10 years. Now, I just want to go back to this earlier slide. If we go all the way back to this slide. Back here. And you have to remember, they are regularly planning for 10 years hence in their force structures. Is it me, or have not a single one of those people made it to made 10 years in their force and their planning structures? They are not around for when their supposed planning structures are going to come into actual existence. They are gone. They come with these plans and then they expect other people to deliver them. I would honestly like a policy put forward that they are not allowed, that any long-term planning over 5 years is an act of parliament at this point. I used to hate that as an idea because it made defence incredibly clunky. But there again, there's a rule in parliament which no parliament can bide the actions of a future parliament, so that won't help either. So, yeah. I don't know how we fix that one, but they keep planning for 10 years hence, and they're nowhere near around to deliver them. So when it's not delivered, it's not their fault, because, well, it's the British public changed who was in charge. But yes, Future Force 2020. Let's look at the stuff below it. Yes, let's look at these lovely phrases coming through. So, readiness. We will hold a small number of our most capable units at high readiness. Doing so imposes additional costs in terms of preparation and training, maintaining equipment ready to go, and having on standby the enablers needed to deploy it rapidly. It places considerable demands on personnel held at high readiness and their families. The majority of forces are held at graduated levels of low readiness, conducting their routine training cycle or recovering from deployment or periods of high readiness, making fewer demands on our equipment and stocks and under less constant pressure. Reconstitution. We will hold some capabilities of what is known as extended readiness. The capabilities will not be available for operations in the short term, but will be capable of being reconstituted if we have strategic notice of possible but low probability events to which we might have to respond to protect our national security. So, for example, we will place elements of our amphibious capability in extended readiness rather than remove them from the force structure entirely. This basically means we are retiring these units but claiming we're not. Because the idea is you're going to have warning of when you're going to need these assets. Probably not. Probably. Because defense rarely works like that. You rarely get that level of signposting that you're going to get months of notice something's going to happen. Days, weeks occasionally, rarely months. Rarely events are so kind to give you the months necessary to generate the crew, the spare parts, the maintenance schedule, the time in dry dock, everything to bring this ship back into tip-top condition. And then, of course, to train it up. Now, this is one of the things, because people find me strange because I say that, but then I quite like the concept of reserves, and I'm always saying we need reserve ships, etc., and these things. Yes, but a properly constituted reserves will have a reservist crew attached to that ship already. So they already have been doing ongoing reserve training, etc., so they're already partially through the process. And because the ship is designed to be activated from reserve, not in some kind of reconstitution where it's going to be reactivated from the regular pool of personnel that you're going to drag from elsewhere, it actually works and makes more sense. It's actually, and there was a study done on this by NATO, when looking into these things, to using a similar state as reconstitution and a reserve state, they found it was actually quicker to activate vessels from reserve. Because you already had the crew, and the crew were already used to working together. And that was a large chunk of your issue. Getting your crew to work together. And knowing the ship they were on. Amazing, really. Reinforcement. Reserve forces will contribute to each element of the future force. They provide additional capacity when regular forces are deployed at maximum effort. But they also provide specialists who it would not be practical or cost-effective. Oh, well, lovely phrase. It turns up so often in British defence policy. Cost-effective to maintain within the regular forces and who can be used to augment smaller operational deployments. Medical reservists play a vital role in Afghanistan, for example. True they did. Regeneration. We'll maintain the ability to regenerate capabilities that we plan not to hold for the immediate future. This will require plans to maintain technical expertise, keep skills and training going, and work with allies and partners who do hold such capabilities, and with whom we can, for example, exchange personnel. We'll have the capability to fly fast jets off maritime platforms when the new Carrier Joint Strike Fighter enters service, but the capability will not be maintained when Harry is retired, so we'll need to plan to regenerate it. And then here's the real killer of the whole thing. Dependency. We rarely deploy alone. We and our NATO allies consciously depend on each other for particular capabilities. For example, the UK does not have its own theatre missile defence capability, while we have capabilities that are highly valued by coalition partners such as mine countermeasure missiles. Part 5 sets out our willingness and intention to deepen operational cooperation and potentially rely more on others when it makes sense to do so. We also depend for some capabilities on the market. For example, we do not hold all the shipping capacity we need since it's more efficient and effective to charter it when we need it. Imagine that. A government saying it's a good thing we don't have our own theatre missile defence capability. Instead of, like the last few reviews, where everyone said, we're going to get it on the Type 45s, just give us more time and investment. And they have so far done absolutely nothing. And are actually replacing the strategic length cells space with C-Sector cells, which won't accommodate missiles of that size. And we still got A50 VLS in there, which was the VLS system with Silver A50 was what was used for the Horizon Frigate project and Horizon program, because it provided the fastest launching facility for missiles of the air defense type, of the Aster type. However, it's the A50 is I think it's termed the tactical length cell, not the strategic length. And so you cannot put the next generation of even larger missiles in there, which are used for theatre, ballistic missile defence, etc. It's fun. It's fun when you look at these procurement decisions. We made a big fuss about going our own way on the Type 45s, and the whole reason we went our own way was because of the needs of the hull design and operations for what we needed to do. And they're small changes, but they're important to the British when we're operating the way we are operating. We then made a muck-up with the engines because we put in... Realistically, we should have used the advantage we had of designing it ourselves to stick in more power than we thought we needed. It turned out we would have less power because of various issues with the turbines and the diesel generators. But there had been ideas about sticking free gas turbines and six diesel engines in there originally as part of the power system. And if they had done that, then there wouldn't be no PIP power improvement package or anything going on, because that would have meant that when you were doing maintenance on one, you'd have still had the other two, and you'd have been able to keep it going. It would have been a fudge system, but it wouldn't have had the issues it has had. But yeah, this is the 2010 document is... There are so many things in there which you sit and look and go, that's a real risk. We don't have that, and you're making it sound like it's a good thing. And of course, no plan, no defence white paper, survives first contact with, well, I would say the enemy, but in this case, history and reality. Yeah, 2011 Libya. And for that, pages 21 to 23 really do make some interesting reading. Now, I know I've put pages 21 and 23 but I'm going to start off with page 19. I know, it's me being contrary again, but there's a reason I'm starting off page 19. Now, this is a fun thing because you've got all these, one of those lovely green documents, and the 7 military tasks. But let's look at this force structure. The new defence planning assumptions envisages the armed forces in the future will be sized and shaped to conduct an enduring stabilisation operation at around brigade level, up to 6,500 personnel, with maritime and air support as required, whilst also conducting one non-enduring complex intervention, up to 2,000 personnel, and one non-enduring simple intervention, up to 1,000 personnel, alternatively 3 non-enduring operations if we are not already engaged in an enduring operation, or, for a limited time and with sufficient warning, committing our force to a one-off intervention of up to 3 brigades with maritime and air support around 30,000, 2/3 of the force deployed to Iraq in 2003. You see, I have this small problem, because every time I'm told we can do more with less because our equipment and our personnel are more lethal than they ever before, I tend to ask the question of, but are our opponents more lethal and more capable than they ever were before? And are the tasks you're challenging the forces with more difficult and more complex than they ever were before? And if the answers to the last two are yes, are in the affirmative, then at a certain point one has to ask, why are you cutting the numbers so? Because it seems to me you're cutting prematurely. You've got premature cutulation. Sorry. Trying to make it slightly bigger and better, it's expanded dramatically. It just seems a bit strange. But let's carry on. And there's our future force, which I've already been through. Ooh. And now we get to the naval forces. Okay, so, naval forces. In the maritime environment, Future Force 2020 will be able to provide nuclear continuous at sea deterrence, maritime defence of the UK and its South Atlantic overseas territories. Notice they haven't mentioned the other British overseas territories or sovereign basing systems, just the South Atlantic ones, the Falklands. And enduring presence in priority regions of the world to contribute to conventional deterrence and containment, powerful intervention capabilities from our surface and submarine fleets, the ability to land forces from sea by helicopter over the beach with protective vehicles and supplies from special ships, and the ability to command UK and allied naval forces at up to task force level. By the way, if you ever want to know a reason why the Royal Navy and the British Armed Forces as a whole have so many senior officers, it's because they maintain so many commands of allied command structures. And because there are certain decisions you do not want to charge with someone who is earning less than money than that. For example, if you're running a multi-billion pound procurement program of, let's say, frigates, where there are literally going to be hundreds of millions, if not billions, in individual deals, you probably want the person in charge of that to be earning enough money they're not going to get swayed by a small amount of stock options, or potentially get swayed by it. You also want them to have experience to make decisions. So this is one of the reasons why you end up with the senior officers you do in the process. Also, sometimes it's a retention of knowledge thing. It's a case of, if we keep promoting you, we can retain you. If we can retain you, we still have access to your brain base as a primary user, and that's what we want. Now, the Trident Force is just and its supporting elements, all this, and 7 new Astute class hunter-killer submarines, able to deploy rapidly from the UK to operational areas. Worth remembering, only 4 of those commissioned, including Audacious, which was in 2020, had commissioned by 2020. And one of those is probably not getting commissioned until 28-29. So there are 3 which don't commission in time for Force 2020. They're not there. They're just not there. And, carrier strike based around a single new operational carrier, with a second plan to be kept in extended readiness. Carrier will embark joint strike fighters and helicopters. A surface fleet of 19 frigates and destroyers. Remember when they said in an earlier one, I think it was the SDR, which I also sometimes called the SDSR because it was all about security apparently, but it was a strategic defense review in 1998 where they said they were reducing from 35 to 32, and that was going to provide all our needs. But within 12 years, it's down to we've got 19, and now, well, on the books we have 13-ish Type 23s, and 7 Type 23s and 6 Type 25s. In terms of operational, because they've all been running to ground, a lot less. Why? Because you had no slack in the system. There was no slack. There was no escort, which was we don't need it for an actual functioning operation, so we'll send it to the NATO Joint Task Force or something like that. It means it's doing something useful, but it's not doing something. It's doing something that we can withdraw from if we need to, if there's an essential requirement comes up. Well, that's the thing. They have everything that had to be doing essential stuff, and then as you had more essential stuff, then you had more available stuff, and then you start pushing everything. Both ship, the important things are, these include 6 Type 45 destroyers, a highly capable air defense destroyer, whose missile system can protect both naval forces and UK sovereign territory. We're still not buying air defense for land bases. We're still not buying land-based air defense missiles like Patriot or anything like that, or even the equivalent of Aster, which has a land-based variant. And the current Type 23 frigates, both ships can operate the Merlin helicopter, and the Type 45 can also operate the Chinook helicopter. That's great if I want to use my Type 45 air defense destroyer as an amphibious assault asset. But I probably don't. I have amphibious shipping for that, don't I? I have Bay class landing ship docks. Oh, you're selling off one of those. And I have landing platform docks. Oh, you're Albion and Bulwark. Oh, no. You're going to put one of those in extended readiness. AK retention. I have Ocean? Oh. Illustrious? No, you're getting rid of those. Okay, maybe I'm going to have to use a Type 45. Maybe. Maybe I am. Seems rather silly to getting rid of all these assets, so I have to use a Type 45 for the role instead of being able to do the air defense role, but there again, we don't really have enough Merlins, do we, thanks to the earlier decision of only buying 44. The Royal Marines, whose Free Commando Brigade will provide one key element of our High Readiness Response Force, they'll be able to land and sustain a commander group of up to 1,800 personnel from the sea, from a helicopter platform and protected vehicles, logistics and command and control support from special ships, including landing and command ship. It would allow us to conduct an operation such as Sierra Leone of 2000. That's another operation which is often forgotten, but was pretty important to British strategic concerns at the time. A maritime helicopter force based around Wildcat Merlin helicopters, with numbers aligned to the overall size of the future maritime force structure. In other words, we're not giving you numbers yet because we're not sure how much we're going to actually bother to buy, if we buy any, but we'll hopefully can do. 14 mine countermeasures vessels. We are now down to goodness knows how few. And a global oceanographic survey capability and a nice patrol ship. A fleet of resupply and refueling vessels scaled to meet the Royal Navy's requirements. That sounds worrying. Maritime strategic transport provided by 6 roll-on, roll-off ferries. Okay. Maritime intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition and reconnaissance capabilities based on network-enabled warships in submarines and aircraft. A streamlined naval regional structure to command reserve forces and represent the Royal Navy throughout the UK. So, with all those pressures, we will accordingly decommission HMS Ark Royal immediately, reduce by 4 the number of frigates, place in extended readiness, the landing and command ship, either HMS Ocean or HMS Illustrious, will be decommissioned following a short study of which provides the most effective helicopter platform capability, and a Bay-class amphibious support ship will be decommissioned. You notice how the mantra of the risks we're facing and the forces we need keeps not matching up with the decisions being made about what they're doing funding-wise. See, some people would claim this was a conspiracy theory. I know it's not. I'm sorry it isn't. A conspiracy theory would actually have some planning in it. This is a lot of short-term decisions based on we want to save money and cost efficiency arguments, not capability efficiency arguments or security arguments. Or, this is the reality of the world. Maybe we want to have some flexibility in our force structure. But that's not cost effective, because that leads you to waste, because you have things which you're not using right now. Yeah. But the thing is, we might be using them in 6 months' time. And then we have this great phrase. Decisions on defense equipment require judgment on what our armed forces will need 20 to 30 years from now. That's true. But also, what you'll need next year. And what you might not realise you're going to need next year, because you can't predict the future. That is particularly true for large warships like carriers and fast jets that fly off them. The previous administration ordered 2 new carriers, 3 times the size of our existing ones. It planned to equip them from a combat air fleet of around 150 fifth-generation Joint Strike Fighters. This $20 billion programme was crowding onto other important investments in our forces. The National Security Council has therefore looked hard at the strategic, industrial and financial assets of this programme and has taken a number of difficult but necessary decisions to achieve by 2020 an adaptable and effective carrier strike capability in balance with the rest of the armed forces. The conclusions are, getting rid of invincible carriers, reducing delaying the procurement of the Joint Strike Fighter, which is one of the reasons why we had the carriers come into service, and even though they've been coming for decades, we didn't have fighters for them. Who would have realised it? You know, the carriers, they've been coming for years. You're going to need to order the fighters in time to have them trained and equipped to have them aboard them? No, and we got rid of the Harriers, so we didn't even have a Harrier force to put on them. And it's all based on a judgment of the world is going to be more safe. The world is going to be safer. You know, there's this argument of, even after 2015, short-range Harriers, whether operating from HMS Illustrious or HMS Queen Elizabeth, provide only a very limited coercive capability. We judge it unlikely that this would be sufficiently useful in the latter half a decade to be cost-effective use of the defence resources. There is often an argument put forward of it was people making the case for the Tornado, and I have seen it, so they cut the Harrier force. And I've seen the arguments and the papers put forward on that one, and there is a certain part of it, but I think that was because there was a false competition made. Why were you getting rid of either Harrier or Tornado when you were getting rid of them? The aircraft to replace either wasn't coming into service at that point. It was down the way. And maybe you needed to retain the Harrier force literally as a carrier force. Okay, that's not going to be too problematic. You could have done that. You've got the Fleet Air Arm. You basically go, okay, hand over all the personnel and aircraft, which are for the Harriers, hand them to the Fleet Air Arm. They're in that budget silo, so now we support them literally for the carriers. That's there for that, and that's their carrier force structure. And then we concentrate the RAF budget around the Tornado and the Eurofighter. But the really funny thing with all this, with all these arguments about them not going to need this stuff, is literally what happened the following year. Because Libya happened. And in Libya, we make a massive thing of sending down HMS Ocean and a whole force around her where she provides combat support with Apache gunships. Because why? We're having to fly Tornadoes and Eurofighters from the UK, tank them up, and then have them drop bombs in Libya. They can only do strike missions. They can't do combat air support because we can't maintain them that range down there for the time they needed. Why? Because all the Allied air bases which are in range, which we thought we would be able to use, will fill up with our allies. And we had no carrier. So despite the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, making a big song and dance about all he was doing for Libya and everything that was capable, realistically the most important assets down there from a British support perspective of being able to actually provide ongoing support to the forces down there. The strikes did their effect, do not get me wrong, the pilots who did it very brave, I'm not disagreeing about their work at all. It's HMS Ocean and the Apache gunships flying off her. They're the useful ones. They're the ones doing good 75% of the work. And it's absurd. And yes, Harriers, relatively short-ranged, I guess. But they've got a long enough range to be useful. They can tank, they can carry fuel, extra fuel if they need to be, all these things. They're useful aircraft, they're still working. It was one of those decisions made with a budget sign, not with an actual security sign. But we still ain't reached the one which is going to make me laugh the most. 2015. And for those who are looking for a time update, yes, we are at the 2-hour mark. Yes, we are at only the 2015 security review. Yes, we're going to be doing the 2015, 2021, and 2025 reviews. And yes, we are at slide 23 of 39. There is a lot more coming. Now, this is a fully Conservative government, and this is also the point at which, honestly, I'm starting to think I should have done an individual video on every single one of these, but I think if I'd done individual videos, A, they'd have been even more time, and B, I'd have probably been in a state of catatonic depression by the time I finished them all. So, let's see what a secure and prosperous United Kingdom translates to. The fact that it actually has the word prosperous in there worries me automatically, because it's looking about money before we've even got there. When you look at the contents, it comes with a foreword from the Prime Minister. Chapter 1, our vision, values and approach. Chapter 2, the UK, strong, influential, global. Chapter 3, the national security context. Chapter 4, protect our people. Chapter 5, protect our global influence. Chapter 6, promote our prosperity. Chapter 7, implementation and reform. And there's also Annex A, summary of the National Security Risk Assessment 2015. Can I just say this? Over time, these SDSRs, or whatever you wish to call them, have turned into buzzword soup. And we are about to go through one of them, which is the second to worst of the buzzword soup. And with that being said, I do not like buzzwords, okay? I find them an annoying thing which people often use to hide and not actually develop real understanding of a topic. They just want to jump on the phrase. There is a lot of that coming up. Prepare, and I apologise for a level of sarcasm which will probably enter the discussion. So, at the top we have the Joint Headquarters, Forces and Enablers, which include Defence Medical and Dental Services, including 3 field hospitals. Defence Intelligence, the Joint Cyber Group. Secure IT and Communication Systems, that's Skynet 5, and the Space Operations Centre, and Special Forces Squadrons, and the Special Reconnaissance and Support. Next up we have Maritime. Delivery of Deterrent and the Maritime Task Group formation. 4 SSBNs, that's Nuclear Deterrent, 7 hunter-killer submarines, 2 aircraft carriers, 19 destroyers and frigates, up to 6 patrol vessels. Up to 6. 12 mine hunters, 3 survey vessels, 1 ice patrol ship. Free commander brigade supported by 2 landing platform docks and 3 landing ship docks, which were used to be called landing ship logistics with dock in brackets, but now landing ship docks. 6 fleet tankers, 3 fleet solid support ships, and 4 Merlin Mark II squadrons and 2 Wildcat squadrons. Oh, don't worry, there's also Merlin Mark II, Merlin Mark IV squadrons in the land warfighting division. And then we get to the air group from 2 F-35 Lightning squadrons, 2 squadrons of F-35s, 7 Typhoon squadrons. Okay, 6 E-3D Sentries, 8 Shadows, 3 Rivet Joints, 6 Force Protection Wings, okay, 8 C-17s, 22 A400M Atlases and 14 C-130J Herculeses, plus 9 P-8 Maritime Patrol aircraft. And then we've got the strategic base of all these things supporting it. This is a lovely graphic. It's Future Force 2025! What do you know? It's different from Future Force 2020. It is still the same government in power, basically. Okay, they've got rid of the Liberal Democrats, but it's the same Prime Minister, etc., carrying on. And now they've gone from the Force for 2020, which they were visiting for 10 years, to this for 2025. Theoretically, if you're looking at this structure and this force formation, you would think the world has got a lot more peaceful. One of the things I can't understand is why at no point did someone sit there and go, well, why don't we make some of these things reserve en masse? Like, okay, we need 2 armoured infantry brigades, but in a nice way, if we're doing force generation, we want to reliably have one available, we need 3. Let's make one of those a reserve formation. Have a reserve armoured infantry brigade and a reserve strike brigade. And that matches in with the 6 infantry brigades, so we have 6 of one and 6 the other, and we can basically have one as a reserve division, regular division, each made of 3 brigades. And so you have, that sort of force matching in. But no, they don't go there. They're using the reserves to patch holes in the regulars at this point. That's what the reserves' major purpose is at this point, in this timeline. They're patching holes in the regular structure. And I would love to say this review gets better. I would love to say it does. But it really doesn't. It really doesn't. Because once you start to go through the Royal Navy, and these are the paragraphs specifically for the Royal Navy, it's dropped down a bit, but it's still there. Royal Navy delivers our nuclear deterrent, protects our maritime power, and provides world-class amphibious forces. As part of Joint Force 2025, we will have 2 new Queen-class aircraft carriers, the largest warships ever built for the Royal Navy. These will enter service from 2018, transforming the Royal Navy's ability to project our influence overseas. They will form the core of our maritime task force group, with 1 available at all times. We're only going to have 2 squadrons of F-35s. Only 2 squadrons of F-35s. So you've got these very useful carriers, but they're only going to have 2 squadrons, roughly 24 aircraft, to draw from between them and the various land assets. Because, let's go back to this previous thing, you saw it. There's only 2 squadrons of F-35s on that list. 2 squadrons. That doesn't seem sensible. I also love how they have the joint stuff in purple. The purple assets, and then they have the stuff which is all one, let's say RAF is all light blue. The stuff which is Joint Royal Air Force and Royal Navy is light blue and dark blue. The stuff which is all Royal Navy is dark blue. And although it's a slightly different shade blue to this for some reason. And then you have the Army stuff in green. It's all lovely, but that suggests you're not going to have enough force structure for what you're talking about, isn't it? Already. It will form the core of the Maritime Task Group, with 1 available at all times. We will increase the number of F-35 Lightning aircraft we are buying in the early 2020s to ensure that we make the best use of this world-leading capability, and we will buy 3 new logistics ships to support the fleet, in addition to the 4 tankers that will enter service from 2016. The logistics ships... well, let's see. The fleet solid support ships finally had steel cut on the first one, the RFA Resurgent, in December 2025. in December 2025. So I don't think it's ready for Force 2025. I think we might get it eventually by Force 2030, but I doubt we'll get it for 2025. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And okay, Type 45 destroyers, Type 23 frigates, Astute class submarines, and mine countermeasures will maintain one of the most capable anti-submarine fleets in the world. Oh, good lord! ASW has come back into the world. Who would have thought it? With introduction of 8 advanced Type 26 global combat ships. That's a problem. Which will start to replace our current Type 23 frigates in their anti-submarine role. We'll maintain our fleet of 19 frigates and destroyers. We will also launch a concept study and then design and build a new class of lighter, flexible, general-purpose frigate, so that by 2030s we can further increase the total number of frigates and destroyers. These general-purpose frigates are also likely to offer increased export potential. We'll buy 2 further new offshore patrol vessels, increasing the Royal Navy's ability to defend UK interests at home and abroad. Don't worry. If you're thinking that happens, don't worry. They maintain in service the batch 1s, and I think they do buy eventually 5 rather than 6 of the batch 2s. They theorised 6 of the batch 2s, but no, they kept the batch 1s in service. They got rid of one of the batch 1s, I think it was Clyde, was transferred to Bahrain in 2019. Because, why would we need a modified batch 1 which had the ability to actually have helicopters landing on its back? Well, we've got all the batch 2s. All 5 of them in service. It was useful to have it. It was useful to have it. And the Royal Marines, 3rd Commando Brigade, who are trained and equipped to provide specialist amphibious and artillery warfare capabilities, we will enhance a Queen Elizabeth-class aircraft carrier to support its amphibious capability. We didn't. Why? Because we realised we were going to need air defence and strike at sea and strike at sea. And now we are currently struggling to make up the issue of not having ordered enough F-55s and trying to make a benefit of it by saying we're going to include more uncrewed aviation assets in the future. The trouble is, we still haven't really done that program. So currently, we have the promise of we're going to get UAVs for this at some point, and not enough F-35Bs at the moment. This is what happens when you keep putting off decisions, when you keep parking them, when you keep promising, looking for Jan tomorrow, looking for the cost efficiency now, but promising we're going to be secure in the future. We'll get all this stuff in the future. Don't worry, we will. We're going to be secure at some point in the future. And it doesn't happen. Oh, great. This slide. Now, this is another great example. Let's dress up threats as risks. It really is. This is why I find this slide particularly annoying in some regards, because it is threats dressed up as risks. There is terrorism, attacks on and radicalisation of UK residents and nationals at home and abroad. That's a tier 1 risk. It's based on a judgment of combination of both likelihood and impact. This is not therefore a simple ranking of their importance. No, it isn't, but Tier 1, we've got terrorism, international military conflict, cyber, public health, major natural hazards, and instability overseas. Tier 2, attacks and pressure on allies, decay and failure of key institutions, CBRN attack, that's chemical, biological, or nuclear attack, weapons proliferation, serious and organised crime, financial crisis, hostile foreign action. Tier 3, military attack on the UK, overseas territories and bases, fuel supply, radioactive or chemical release, resource insecurity, public disorder, weather and other natural hazards, and environmental events. Now, whilst a lot of these are worthy of discussion and looking at, I would say when you're in terms of you're doing your defence planning and security planning, not all of them really should come into that. Or rather, if you're going to put it in there, you probably need to do a little bit more analysis and a little bit more development than just sticking them in a big table like this. You probably do need to do a little bit more explanation. Also of why you're putting them into Tier 1, Tier 2 and Tier 3. Major natural hazards. Events that need a natural response, e.g. severe flooding. In the UK, severe flooding, well, unfortunately, they've got rid of quite a lot of the really reduced the number of helicopters, etc., and things the armed forces have. But still, they do quite a lot of work, and they get called out, and they really do help out. But again, it's support of the civilian authorities. Public health, a major human health crisis. Basically, that turns up so often in preparation studies, but we were quite so unprepared when COVID hit. It's kind of like, again, that hospital ship thing. Turns up. Yes, we are preparing for this. What are we actually doing? We have a plan based on a breakout of very bad flu. Okay. When it comes into existence, panic. International military conflict. Okay. UK involved in a conflict between state and or non-state actors. Alright. So, if that's being acknowledged as a risk, what are you doing about that? What are you doing about that in this structure? In all the previous slides, what have you been doing that suggests you're preparing that? Because I would say a breakout of conflict between you and a peer-on-peer threat, or a international conflict solo, means you're going to need guaranteed capabilities. Which means, why are you only getting a pair of aircraft carriers? Why are you reducing the number of destroyers? Why, if this is really your risks and threat analysis, are you cutting your force structure and not actually thinking about what your force structure retains? Because you've already done the research and development for all these things. You've already done the R&D. All the costs for the Type 45s, etc. had already been done. You literally just need to pay for the construction of another couple of units. And you get 8. 3 more and you get 9. And that is a real force multiplier versus 6. Also, if you're not going to be procuring your F-35Bs that fast, why are you not getting the Mark 41 VLS fitted to Type 45s? The strategic link cells, which they were designed for and fitted for, but not with, which would have allowed them to carry Tomahawk cruise missiles. And you could have therefore would have had that as a force multiplier. And again, getting 12 Type 45s, or to the full original plan, would have given you that kind of resilience, and would have given you a whole load of extra strategic length cells, which you could have used. They can each carry 24, so you could have loaded each one up with 16 Tomahawks and 8. Ask the Americans for standard missile free or some a similar system like that, so you have some theatre ballistic missile defense. Then you don't have to keep selling. In fact, you are dependent upon allies for that as a virtue, as a wonderful thing. Because it isn't a wonderful thing. Let's be honest, it is not a wonderful thing. No, SDSR 2015 is a document which is full of as many holes as 2010 and probably gets worse. And, well, really the sensible point is to conclude with its foreword, because that is its actual conclusion and where it's actually all decided from. And in that, we have David Cameron here putting his picture looking... Honestly, that's not a good picture to select. I don't mean this in a rude way. I just mean, does that or does that not look like a deer caught in the headlights picture? That looks like something... That looks like when I'm driving down a country lane at night and I see a bunny rabbit or a hare in the middle of the road and it's just looking at me going... And I sort of pause and stop. It has the same look of straight ahead going... I'm sorry, it just does. Our security, national security, depends on our economic security and vice versa. So the first step in our national security strategy is to ensure our economy is and remains strong. Okay, we've come out and said it. Economy is more important than defence. But the economy is important because that maintains your defence. Okay, fine. Over the last 5 years, we've taken difficult decisions needed to bring down our deficit and restore our economy to strength. This sounds more like a campaign leaflet than it does a defence document. In 2010, the total black hole in the defence budget alone was bigger than the entire defence budget in that year. Not quite, but carry on. Now it is back in balance. No. By sticking to our long-term economic plan, Britain has become the fastest-growing major advanced economy in the world for the last 2 years. Our renewed economic security means we can afford to invest further in our national security. This is vital at a time when the threats to our country are growing. From the rise of ISIL, the Islamic State, if you have managed to miss that they rose or you weren't around at that point, and greater instability in the Middle East, to the crisis in Ukraine. Again, This is after 2014. This is after the Russian annexation of Crimea. The threat of cyber attacks and the risk of pandemics. The world is more dangerous and uncertain. It's amazing how many people were worrying about the risk of pandemics well before we got to COVID, but no one had done much about it. The world is more dangerous and uncertain today than 5 years ago. And you're cutting your defences? Okay. So while every government must choose how to spend the money it has available, every penny of which is hard-earned by taxpayers, this government has taken a clear decision to invest in our security and safeguard our prosperity. As a result, the United Kingdom is the only major country in the world today which is simultaneously growing to meet the UK target of spending 2% of our GDP on defence. Once you add in various war graves and other things, yes, we're making the 2%. And the UN target of spending 0.7% of our GNI on development. 2% of our GDP on defence and 0.7% of our GNI, of our gross national income on development. 2% of gross domestic product on defence and 0.7% of our gross national income on development. And that's why the Foreign Commonwealth Office was rebranded to include development as part of their naming. Whilst also increasing investment in our security and intelligence agencies and the counter-terrorism. In ensuring our national security, we will also protect our economic security. As a trading nation with the world's 5th biggest economy, we depend on stability and order in the world. Well, that's not surprising. With 5 million British nationals living overseas and our prosperity depending on trade around the world. Again, you're emphasising the trade around the world. Again, and you've cut the ships which actually defend your sea lines and communication. Okay. Engagement is not an optional extra. It is a fundamental to the success of our nation. We need the sea lanes to stay open and the arteries of global commerce to remain free-flowing. So this document sets out our national security strategy for the coming 5 years and how we will implement it. It's amazing. It's called Force 2020. It's Force 2025, and yet it's the coming 5 years. So is this a 10-year document or a 5-year document? It presents a clear vision for a secure and prosperous United Kingdom with global reach and global influence. At its heart is an understanding that we cannot choose between conventional defences against state-based threats and the need to counter threats that do not recognise national borders. Today we face both and we must respond to both. So, over the course of this Parliament, our priorities are to deter state-based threats, tackle terrorism, remain a world leader in cybersecurity and ensure we have the capability to respond rapidly to crises as they emerge. To meet these priorities, we will continue to harness all the tools of national power available to us, coordinated through the National Security Council to deliver a full spectrum approach. Okay. And believe it or not, it carries on. But it does have this great line. History teaches us that no government can predict the future. We have no way of knowing precisely what course events will take over the next 5 years. We must expect the unexpected. But we can make sure that we have the versatility and the means to respond to new risks and threats to our security as they arise. By cutting stuff! And I know the argument is they invest in other things too. But here's the thing. Investing in new technologies and cutting the old technology before new technology comes into service, or new capability comes into service, means you have a gap in your force structure. And as I've said before, usually what happens is they go, we're cutting this because we're going to have this tomorrow. And then the next one, they're cutting the thing that was coming tomorrow to replace it. And then you no longer have it. I don't know. And it happens so often, it is frankly disturbing. But with that, let's move on to 2021. Now, this document, well, how do I put this rightly? It's second part of a double feature, and honestly, defence in a competitive age is probably only exceeded in its buzzword salad by global Britain in a competitive age. The Integrated Review of Security, Defence, Development and Foreign Policy, which is a masterpiece in stating sometimes the blindingly obvious, and sometimes some very interesting points, but a lot of ideas which are not later on delivered on. And that's the major problem. A lot of this stuff is, we've got all these ideas, we know this is, and then we're going to deliver this. But on the plus side, this is the first time that they actually start putting some concrete ideas forward of how to expand the armed forces. Again, it's for the future. Don't get me wrong. It's not saying it's going to expand them immediately. It's saying it's going to expand them in a decade's time. Which, as you all know, there's another SDSR coming up after this in 2025, which is done by a completely different government. So, do you think any of the things that offer promise of this in a decade's time will actually be delivered? Well, that'll be for you to judge. That'll be for you to judge. So, let's go to... And I can't believe I'm doing this because I'm currently looking at it already on the screen, ready for this. The foreword, which was provided by the then Secretary of State for Defense. And, yes, Ben Wallace tries his best, but Bambi David Cameron was one thing. You can decide what you think of this one. You can decide. There we go. I'm not sure what that picture's trying to say to me, but it's making me ask questions. I'm sorry it is. And this is the thing I don't understand, is they spent a huge amount of money on putting these together on the graphics, and this one has so many graphics. I'll be going through the graphics and so many great pictures, etc. And then you go, okay, so when you were picking the picture for the politician who's writing your foreword, did no one look at it and go, perhaps you want a picture of him standing with the armed forces? Perhaps you want a picture of him, maybe not looking like something looking like some sort of alien or problematic facial expressions. Could we just go for something where they look remotely normal? And it also has this great double page open, and sort of which has the section of our global foundation and British defence staffs, defence attaché networks, hubs, bases, large training areas all around the world. It's split over 2 pages. Yeah, this is one full of graphics. It's what can I say? It's very interactive. Someone had a lot of time and a large editing budget to make these graphics. They're the sort of graphics which did involve a lot of people who actually knew about design, which is lovely. But again, when all this stuff has been done, and I'm emphasizing this by going through all this work has been done on the graphics to make them look good and cool and interactive and useful and have them retelling information, and you spent all that money, all that time and effort, and yet the very first picture you get to after this front cover, the very first picture you get to is this. Now, I don't claim to be the most photogenic person myself in the world. I really am not. But I hope I would select a better picture than this one. And it starts off with, as a young officer 30 years ago, almost to the day, I was summoned to the drill square to have read aloud key decisions from the government's defence review, options for change. We did not know it then, but the world was set for a massive change, not the fall of the Soviet Union, but other geopolitical changes, such as the rise of China, terrorist threat from Al-Qaeda, and global impact of the internet, which were all some way off, but no one was really prepared for what happened when they did. That's a worthwhile opener. And again, why am I making a fuss over the pictures? Just to point it out. You are presenting this as your document, of your serious document for defence, that you've put a lot of time and effort into. Why is it for both this one and the previous one, do the pictures you're selecting at the beginning seem like they were afterthoughts? Okay? And the moment you start thinking, well, hang on, if they're not even bothering about the pictures for themselves, and they're supposedly the ones writing the forward, they're the ones who signed off on these reports, and they haven't really thought through those, how much attention have they paid to the actual report? How much do they really care about it? And I met Ben. He's lovely, and I'm sure he cares a lot about this. And having talked to him, I would testify he does care a lot about this. I don't agree with everything he did, but I know he cares a lot about it. But that picture does not show you care about it. Now, it carries on, and there's a great couple of paragraphs here. It would be similar in danger people if it simply wielded a sword of cut, slicing away the battle proven on the promise of novelty, without regard for what is left behind. Old capabilities are not necessarily redundant, just as new technologies are not always relevant. Those of us in government charged to protect and defend have a duty to enter new domains, as well as continuing investment in the traditional ones, but always adapting to the threat. History shows us time and time again that failing to do so risks irrelevance and defeat. As the threat changes, we must change with it, remaining clear-eyed about what capabilities we retire, why we are doing so, and how they will be replaced. The trouble is, you've been set up by the 2010, and the 2003, and the 1998 reviews, my friend. There are limits to what you can do, unless you're planning to invest in a lot of infrastructure, which you should have been doing, but, hey-ho. Most of that infrastructure investment, which they do actually do in this point one, is still not finished yet, because it took them a long time to decide on what infrastructure they're investing in. It's a fun time. We do have planes for the carriers, by the way. Before anyone goes around saying this video says we have no planes. We do. We just don't have enough. Because apparently they're entering into service of these large aircraft carriers, which have been on the books since 1998 and have been in the works since the earlier 1990s. Have surprised everyone! And so we didn't, they kept promising we will buy more in the early 2020s. It didn't happen. Because you can't sign up future parliaments to do something, force future parliaments to do something, and you can't force future governments to do something. Especially when you're not going to be that government. But let's go look further into this document, shall we? So here's the first of the graphics, which really does impress me. I found the whole Defence in a Competitive Age, its chapter titles were quite amusing as well. Changing strategic context, the future battlefield, our strategic approach, evolving for the future. Defence's contribution to global Britain, our workforce, our finest asset. Modernising forces for a competitive age, a strong relationship with industry, transforming our ways of working. Is it me, or do those titles just scream buzzwords for you? I'm not seeing one said titled simply The Future Royal Navy, or The Future Royal Air Force, or The Future British Army. None of them like that. No. We're going to give you these lovely titles, which are all beautiful, but... And then we have the threat. And I don't know what this diagram is supposed to do, because you've got state-based threats right at the top corner. And then that connects to electromagnetic railguns and novel weapons. But apparently, then, so through electromagnetic railguns, it connects to space. And then you've got the global security post-COVID-19, which is connected from space. So did it come from space? And you've got hypersonics and cyber. And this is one of the things where someone has produced a really cool graphic. And you sit there and go, this is just meant as a graphic to be really cool and looked at. It is not meant to have any value whatsoever. And it doesn't. It does not have any value whatsoever, because it's just a list of things. I mean, I've talked about ones where I'm frankly not sure about the ranking and necessarily the inclusion. This one, I honestly don't know what they were thinking. I really don't. It looks so cool, and I can stick it up on a wall for my students. I have done. And I've sat it up there and gone, so this is what happens when someone gets obsessed with trying to do a mind map of everything, or a thought map, and doesn't actually really think about it. Because you've got electromagnetic railguns, and then you've got high-energy weapons, and they're not directly connected. In fact, the only way you can get from electromagnetic railguns to high-energy weapons is through space and global security post-COVID-19 on one side, or novel weapons and climate change affecting regional instability on the other side. And whilst they are factors, I wouldn't say that is how I would necessarily get it. Maybe through novel weapons, maybe. But It's a graphic. It's a graphic. And I have no idea why they chose that particular graphic, but they did. And it makes even less sense once you realise what chapters it's in, because, oh boy. Meet the Changing Strategic Context chapter. Now, this sets out all sorts of ideas and all sorts of things in it. And then it goes from the rising power of China is by far the most significant geopolitical factor in the world. China poses a complex systemic challenge. As the integrated review makes clear, we need to be prepared to push back to protect our values and global interests while maintaining our ability to cooperate in tackling global challenges such as climate change and the mutual benefits of our economic relationship. And then that's, I presume, page 6, because is all that, and then it's page 7. And then it carries on with the significant impact of China's military modernization, which is proceeding faster than any other nation, and growing international assertiveness within the Indo-Pacific region will pose an increasing challenge. Okay. And we have a satellite communications network and systems profiling going on here. And, oh look, there's your carrier. And there's your Type 26 frigate as it was envisioned at that point. The graphics are going to be fun. But yes, it's just in a section which needs clarity and needs thought, and really would benefit from clarity and thought going through it. You have got some clarity going on, some structure going on in the written work, and then you've got this, which distracts from the whole thing. And also, I did love this last paragraph, though. Our historic technological advantage is being increasingly challenged by targeted investment in capabilities designed to counter our strengths and challenge strategic stability, such as hypersonic missiles to defeat missile defenses and nuclear-powered cruise missiles. This is why I love it when people go, wow, hypersonics, they're a new threat. And I'm sitting there going, we've been talking about them in defense reviews for, like, nearly 2 decades. It's nothing new. They've been coming for a while. That we haven't prepared. We talk about preparing, but we haven't prepared for them realistically. But we kept talking about it for those 2 decades. But the fact that we're not ready for them and don't have stuff in service isn't because we didn't know they're coming. It's because we have kept dithering over how to prepare them and what to do. And now we're in the situation we're in. These advanced conventional weapons are increasingly available to a wider range of state actors. Some countries are also adopting a military-civil fusion approach towards the development of new technologies, harnessing civilian innovation for the benefit of their defense capabilities. This is again nothing new. Britain did it in World War II. Britain did it in World War I. France did it in World War I. Britain did it during the Napoleonic Wars. It's kind of traditional methodology. I don't see why this is a new scary thing. Conversely, the imaginative employment of relatively low-cost capabilities is challenging highly capable air defense and electronic warfare systems or heavily armored forces, as we have seen in Libya and Nagorno-Karabakh, respectively. I'm not quite sure those are the conclusions I would draw from Libya. Maybe from Nagorno-Karabakh. But Libya's an interesting case. It really is. Either way, an interesting chapter 1. A really interesting chapter 1. Confusing, but we survived it. And then we get on to further along. Now, I have to say, Defence's contribution to international relations, or rather to the integrated review, whenever I see IR, I think international relations, and then I go, oh no, it was integrated review. And it basically put forward sustaining strategic advantage through science and technology, shaping the open international order of the future, strengthening security and defense at home and overseas, building resilience at home and overseas. Once again, promise of a lot of investment in things like 6.6 billion in research and development over the next 4 years. Lovely. A lovely lot of money. But it's the promise of jam tomorrow. It's something which comes up. It's a phrase which we love in the UK of, you can only have bread and butter today. And actually, it might just be bread because butter's looking expensive, but tomorrow you'll have bread, butter, and jam. You'll have toast. Yeah. No. And then we got the protecting homeland one. That is a beautiful, beautiful graphic. That really is. Along with the carrier strike group graphic, these two really do start to sum up these things, because when you realise that as soon as they came into power in 2010, one of the first things the government looked at was David Cameron's government and Nick Clegg, the coalition government, looked at was trying to cancel the carrier program completely. And now it is a symbol of global Britain in action. Both our carriers, Queen Elizabeth and Prince of Wales, assembled in Scotland from sections built across the Union. Supporting, the carrier strike group comprises cutting-edge frigates. No, it didn't. It carries Type 23s, which are very good. They've been modernised, but let's be honest, they are from the 1990s. We are now in the 2010s. And in fact, we're in the 2020s. These are not cutting-edge ships. They are good ships. They're not cutting-edge ships. Destroyers, we don't have enough of. A carrier wing of Royal Air Force and Royal Navy F-35B jets. We had about one squadron at the point, which was a joint squadron, and we still have now the two squadrons. No. Helicopters, international and interchangeable by design. What I love is the amount of hubris that goes into this, because if you consider previously, in the previous thing, they'd been looking at turning these carriers into Calabar. Then they found out that was going to be far too expensive because they made design changes to make it cheaper earlier on in the build. Even though it was supposed to be designed to be able to be converted into Calabar formation, the previous government had cut things which would have made it possible as a way to save money. So each review has cut things from these ships, and this is why we end up with the ships we have. And of course, the original idea had been that they would be in stubble form, but there would be LHDs, and that was back in the early 1990s, which would be Albion, Bulwark, and Ocean, and all these things. They would be LHDs. Or actually, there was even an idea originally that Albion and Bulwark would have been LHDs, and the aircraft would be able to operate off all of them. And that would actually been a really cool idea for Britain I would say it is a medium power, but it's in the global category of the medium powers because it has to be, because of its interests and its economic criteria and its dependence on sea lines of communication going on around the world. And so realistically, it would have helped Britain to that, because we have had 5 ships which could have all operated the same aircraft. Not as many from the LHDs as the aircraft carrier, but they could have done that. And free large docks, and it would have been very sensible, but that's not the situation we're in. Protecting our homeland, on the other hand, well, that comes in with the strategic deterrence. That comes with securing the North Atlantic, which apparently is going to take submarines, frigates, and long-range maritime patrol aircraft, and uncrewed surface vessels. Yes, I'm sorry to say, those little icons that you see on there are USVs. I know there's currently a lot of talk with the 2025 SDSR about bastions and the use of USVs and how this is a new novel idea. But it's been coming arguably since the 2015 one, and it was integrated heavily into the 2021 one. It's just been coming a long time. It just hasn't been implemented yet because people keep pushing the decision of what actual USVs to buy down the road. And then we've got ensuring our connectivity, which I'm presuming is about internet and various communications security. Defending our seas and sky, again, more submarines and Eurofighter, Typhoons, and long-range maritime patrol aircraft and airborne early warning aircraft. And again, a patrol vessel from River class, a Type 26 frigate, I'm presuming that's the icon for. It is the icon for it. And an Astute class submarine. And then protecting our waters. That's River-class patrol vessels again. And if you're looking at this force structure around here, that would actually be interesting, because we've got a ballistic missile submarine on patrol. We've got 2 Astutes, 3 Type 26s, 3 River-class patrol vessels, 3 USVs, a oceanic reconnaissance vessel, or sort of oceanic survey vessel, a couple of Eurofighters, E3 or E7, depending on your perspective. P8, maritime patrol aircraft. Yeah. Whole list of assets, which you would need roughly 3 times the number of to guarantee availability of. 4 if it's your continuous at sea deterrence. Let's be honest though, if you did have 6 subs, you could usually guarantee 2 wandering around the UK. And if you did have 9 Type 26s, you can usually guarantee 3. Usually you're going to have 4 available from 9. And the same with 9 patrol vessels. We don't have any of those. We're actually only procuring 8 Type 26s because that's all you need in an age where it's getting peer threats are increasing and submarine threat is increasing. We're only procuring 8 frigates that are ASW focused assets. Type 31s could have some adaptations built into them, but so far no firm announcements. Lots of ideas of it, but no firm announcements. Not in this one anyway, or even in the most recent one. And then it goes on. Oh, it goes on. More graphics. More graphics. You do have to love this one. This is the Integrated Force 2030. 9 years' time, not 10 years' time, I suppose, on this one. But you start looking at all the assets being listed. The E7A, the Voyager, the P8A. That little USV system is listed as the mine countermeasure system, which were uncrewed surface vessels. That's the earliest version of it. We've got persistent engagement listed there. We've got homeland security. We've got crisis response and warfighting. And what I love is every single one of these reviews changes the frigating terminology they're using to describe the forces. They have got new ideas, new buzzwords, new things to put into that. And it's just a constant changeover. I'd also love that the Future Commander Force look quite so dynamic and the Special Forces look quite so dynamic as their pictures. Then we've got the RAF Force Protection Wing. They're looking pretty beefy. EOD Regiment, lots and lots of work has been put into making these graphics look cool. And actually delivering the force structure would be what I'd be keen on. Really would be. And then we have Strategic Command, the Integrated Forces. Again, lots of graphics going on. But what I loved was, they also list there, Germany, Oman, Kenya, Falklanders, Ascensions, Brunei, Gibraltar, Cyprus, British Indian British sort of Indian overseas, Indian Ocean territories. All these are listed there. All of them are listed. They're important, and they're listed. But when we move past all the wonderful graphics, let's move into what actually they're talking about for the Royal Navy. Now, this one was interesting in that it makes a strategic link straight between shipbuilding and the size of the Royal Navy and the ability to sell stuff. As in, if we are buying stuff and building stuff our own assets, so we have off-the-shelf assets, we can sell them to other people. It's a great idea. Who'd have thunk it? We used to do it in the 50s and 60s, and even did a bit in the 70s. Remember, Argentina bought Type 42s. But yes, it's something which has to be remembered again and again and again. And in this case, well, what can I say about it? There's a lot of interesting things being promised. There's a Type 32 frigate mentioned, which was basically always going to be Batch 2 Type 31s. That would provide persistent presence overseas in support of our littoral response groups, along with the Type 31s and the various other assets. The multi-role support ships to provide the platforms to deliver littoral strike, including maritime special operations. What's going to replace Albion, Bulwark, Land in the Bay class, all those. Still, no details on that one. So it's still being talked about, but nothing's come forward. And the concept and assessment phase for our Type 83 destroyer, which will begin to replace our Type 45 destroyers in the late 2030s. Well, I suppose, considering the timeline it takes to actually get things, actually discussing this at this point is a good thing. Because, we're probably going to have at least 3 reviews before they start being ordered or actually don't. So it's about the risk point which we should just start talking about them. But yeah, overall shipbuilding investment will double over the life of this Parliament, rising to 1.7 billion a year. That sounds like a lot of money. Realistically, is it a lot of money considering how little investment had been done previously? How little work can be done to grow the shipbuilding capacity, to invest in infrastructure like dry docks and those facilities? Well, considering our current availability rates, yeah, I'm not that sure it's doing that well. This is one of those scenarios where you read through these documents and you're going, well, they have a lot of good ideas. They don't have a lot of ideas on how they're going to actually achieve them. They really don't. And when it comes to the maritime sector, this seems especially the case. And that might sound egotistical or naval-focused, but I am a naval historian, and it's the one I know best of the options. And realistically, I would have expected something slightly more. Something slightly more. Now, let's actually read through that section of document, shall we? Let's see what it says. Now, there you go, we have the lovely cover page, and then we have 7.2. The Royal Navy is transforming at pace, becoming more threat-focused and more lethal. Threat-focused, not risk-focused, threat-focused. Sounds like, again, they're jumping from threat to threat rather than looking at the actual risks. The Royal Navy continue to contribute to UK interests, safeguarding our homeland, overseas territories, crown dependencies, and protect the maritime environment, including our fisheries, projecting global influence, boosting UK trade and prosperity, upholding our values and international law. I'm sure at some point someone is going to bring up the channel in the comments below, and possibly they won't have got this far in the video, but I will point out that along with losing fisheries, the Royal Navy lost to things like the Border Force, etc., the job of doing that. The Royal Navy now is purely there to assist the civilian powers if they call them in. And honestly, there are a lot of scenarios where they don't want to call them in because, frankly, it's going to add a whole layer above in terms of rules of engagement, which they don't necessarily want to have. Now, again, they can be useful, and I would argue their assets, etc., should be very useful. But again, things like helicopter-borne airborne early warning, sitting over the channel, watching these things, might be useful as a monitor system. But that again depends on: do we really get surprised, or have we already got intelligence coming from other assets in France watching the boats leave? And realistically, the best place to stop the boats leaving, reaching Britain, would be actually ashore in France. But again, that requires cooperation with allies, and allies don't always necessarily want to cooperate, or they have other priorities which they're focusing in on. It's been fun. And then we go, the Royal Navy will invest 40 million over the next 4 years to develop our future commando force as part of the transformation of our amphibious forces, as well as more than 50 million in converting a Bay-class support ship to deliver a more agile, lethal, littoral strike capability. Forward deployed to respond rapidly to crises. This special operations capable force will operate alongside our allies. Again, it's going to be a light little force. It's not a peer conflict force. It's a raiding force in maximum in a peer conflict. It's not a theatre entry force. And when we consider, when we start talking about Norway today, the reason they're not talking about amphibious delivery of forces is because realistically we need to get a brigade-sized asset up there, and we don't have a brigade-sized asset to deploy up there because of the decisions made earlier on. And we don't have the amphibious forces to deploy it. So we would be using other assets. And there will be people who go, well, we can't use amphibious forces in the modern world. Well, you can. Honestly, again, in the Falklands War, what was Michael Clapp's favourite phrase? Oh yes, rock trumps Exocet. They had Exocet missiles. They were supposed to be devastating to the amphibious task group. They weren't able to be used against them. Why? Because they got themselves into the closest thing that looked like a Norwegian fjord, San Carlos Bay, and had enough rock around them that it made sure the aircraft didn't have an easier time getting into them. Now, yes, there are other missiles and other threats these days, but it's similar. There are similar geographical limitations still in place. That before you can fire something, you need to know where something is, and you need to have a reasonable, accurate target lock on it. And in the Falklands, one of the problems we had was that despite having a Norway job, we weren't actually that good at inshore operations in terms of our radars and systems, which meant there was a lot of clutter, which obscured the radars from working. These days, we are far better at that because of lessons of the Falklands War, and so we tend to be more survivable in that scenario. But you still need a certain critical mass of force to actually be able to deliver these things. 7.24. In conjunction with the US and other NATO allies, the Royal Navy will continue to invest in underwater capabilities as this remains pivotal to our critical national infrastructure, safeguarding maritime trade and maintain our underwater advantage. This will include delivering a safer, faster, automated mine hunting capability. In partnership with France, the Royal Navy will retire mine countermeasure vessels as these new capabilities come into service. Please go check the Royal Navy and see if those new vessels have come into service, because I've seen a lot of MCMVs retired. We've also apparently, on 721, permanently attributed the nuclear deterrent, the carrier strike group, and little strike forces to NATO. Helpful if that's the case. But again, it is the carrier battle group which is the centerpiece of this force structure, and they are pushing it forward. And there's no surprise that in both these pictures they are built around a carrier task group using supply ships, a tanker. We've got in this picture a tanker. We've got a Arleigh class destroyer. We've got a Type 45 destroyer. We've got I think that might have been a Danish, it was Hudfeldt class, which was the predecessor to Type 31s. And a resupply ship and a Type 45, but... and there's also a Type 23, I think, one around... No, second Type 45, actually, off there. But, yeah, they're using these pictures to emphasize the carrier battle group and the carrier strength as the cornerstone of their force. But it's a lot of promises of jam tomorrow. A lot of promises. And a lot of ideas about what they're going to deliver by 2030, which is going to be at least 2 parliaments away. There's going to be at least another election. This is early on in the parliament, so you've got a whole parliament to get through, and then you're going to have another election cycle. Yeah, this is going to be a long way away. And the next election is in 2029, so 2024, 2029, yeah, it's a long way away. But, well, it could have been worse. Because at least they were talking about growth. Not delivering on it, but they were talking about it. However, now we've gone on to the recent 2025 Strategic Defence Review. Apparently making Britain safer, secure at home and strong abroad. Let's see. Now, here is the fun thing. I've left this as SDR. So I wanted to include security in the first one, because realistically, it did value security as much as defence. It was about that. And security, to me, is always about the civilian powers and supporting the civil powers and that relationship. In this one, this reading of the SDR, 2025 SDR, it is, I would argue, more defence-orientated in its terms of content and pitch. I would argue it is. And that's why I've left the security off. But it is still thinking about security. And I think there is a scenario here where you have to start thinking through as goes. Governments are often full of politicians who are far more comfortable talking about domestic political issues than they are foreign political issues, and domestic threats rather than international threats, and domestic risk over international risk. Things they see and touch, they know what they understand. Do quite like this one that is as focused as it is on defence, but I'd still say, as a review goes, I'm not quite sure if the content and the plans match the claims. And again, though, I'm not sure who is picking the pictures of the politicians involved in these reviews, but seriously, There has been like one good picture in the entire reviews, and I'm going to let you go find out myself, but that is the current Defence Secretary, John Healey. He is the first photo which has looked like an actual normal human being. Please go look it up. But Keir Starmer is once again... I don't know what he's trying to look for, but frankly he looks constipated in this picture. I don't know who is picking these pictures for these people, but they are supposedly important members of government. They're writing in supposedly representing themselves in an important document, and then they choose pictures which look like that. And he looks like a mildly upset head teacher who's also constipated at the same time. And what I love is he starts off with, my first duty as Prime Minister is to keep the British people safe. That is why national security is the foundation of this government's plan for change. In this new era for defence and security, notice defence and security is turned up, but it's Strategic Defence Review. When Russia is waging war on our continent and probing our defences at home, we must meet the danger head-on. We must recognise the very nature of warfare is being transformed on the battlefields of Ukraine and adapt our armed forces and our industry to lead this innovation. And we must understand that global instability affects economic security too, driving down growth and driving up the cost of living for working families here at home. All good stuff. But okay, so if this is the threat now, and your first thing is to launch a strategic review, then it's starting off with paragraph 3. We are delivering our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP in defence, accelerating it to 2027, and we are set the ambition to reach 3% in the next Parliament. The next Parliament. This one ends in 2029. Okay, then there's another one. You're not going to be potentially not in charge in next Parliament. If we're going by the predecessors and the likelihood of it, we're not sure we don't think you're going to be in charge in next Parliament. You might think you are, but no one else has. So, your promise to reach 3% next Parliament is worth absolutely bumpkus. I'm sorry, it is. Bumpkus. That's it. It's worth nothing. I love the ambition. It's worth now. Unless you actually do it while you're in power, it is not worth it. You are promising something you will not have to deliver. The whole time. And the whole way through, just keep the thing of security appearing in not appearing in the review titles and all these things. It's just silly. We have no standardization going on in these formats, and every government is just literally making it up almost as they go along in terms of what we're going to do, how we're going to present it, and how we're going to hold ourselves to the standard. And they're always promising stuff for the Parliament after they're out of power. Or rather, the Parliament after they've gone through another general election, things might have changed again. And then it gets even more fun, because our response cannot be confined to increasing defence spending. We also need to see the biggest shift in mindset in my lifetime, to put security and defence front and centre, to make it fundamental organising principle of government. Wow. I mean, considering the recent issues we've had over an order of 23 helicopters, which, by the way, is a really weird number, because that means you can basically guarantee one squadron of 12 aircraft available. So why are you getting 23? Oh, that's the number we've been left with of Pumas, and it said this order is not supposed to just replace Pumas. We're only left with that number of Pumas because we had some aircraft damaged, and we didn't manage to fix them. So why are we not ordering, I don't know, 36? 44? Enough to guarantee a couple of squadrons, plus the aircraft for maintenance and deep maintenance, and when we're taking the airframes apart. Oh, no, we're ordering 23. And even that, John Healey, the Defence Secretary, was going down to Yeovilton to do a presentation about it and talk about it. He got stopped because Treasury weren't sure they were going to fund it. Then Treasury announced they were funding it, and they announced it was because of their intervention, they're supporting it. And everyone's looking at Treasury and going, no, everyone knows you were the ones who have been failing to fund things, which is why the Defence Investment Plan has yet to come out. And so if the Treasury is not accepting defence as a fundamental organising principle of government, then it's not a fundamental organising principle of government. And this is just months after you've put in the Strategic Defence Review, and you've literally, the Prime Minister has written this. This landmark strategic defence review will help to make this all a reality. I'm very grateful to Lord Robertson of Port Ellen, General Sir Richard Barrons, and Dr. Fiona Hill for all their work to lead it. The government will now drive a national effort to deliver it. No, they won't. What I did love is that there is is the middle paragraph, though realistically you have an hour, or second to last, I suppose you could argue, but it looks like a middle paragraph with size. Our experience of the pandemic exposed the vulnerabilities of relying on international just-in-time supply chains and required a whole-of-society response. In this spirit, we must drive a new partnership with industry and radical reform of procurement, creating jobs, wealth and opportunity in every corner of our country. This is the defence dividend, which we are determined to seize. It must drive innovation at a wartime pace, making the UK the leading edge of innovation in NATO and equipping our forces with a full range of conventional and technological capabilities. And it must foster a collective national endeavour through which the state, business and society unite in pursuit of the security of the nation and prosperity of its people. Defence dividend, prosperity. Oh yes, this is another economic focused review, isn't it? What's it focused on? Is it focused on cutting? Is it focused on spending? Who knows? We haven't got a defence investment plan. We have no real idea yet. But let's talk about the defence investment plan just before we get further on to this. The Defence Investment Plan was supposed to be published in autumn 2025. Theoretically, it might come out this month. I have very little to no hope. When we look through John Healey's own document, and which includes, it mentions, the final paragraph is the Defence Investment Plan, and we will develop a new Defence Investment Plan to deliver the SDR's vision. That has yet to come about. And mainly it's maybe because of this note on the National Audit Office's site of affordability of the MOD's investment plan, work in progress. And delivering the plan for change? Well, NATO first, stepping up a European security by leading in NATO with a strength for nuclear, new tech and updated conventional capabilities. Move to war-fighting readiness. Establish a more lethal, integrated force. Oh, integrated force. Now, where have I heard things like that before? Ooh, I'm going to have to think about that. Engine for growth, driving jobs and prosperity for a new partnership with industry. UK innovation driven by lessons from Ukraine. Whole society approach. One of these is about working with allies and spreading the cost with allies. One is about actually doing something with the force, I'm not sure what. And 3 are pretty much about economics. Free are economics. And well, then we get to the role of the Royal Navy, and for this, we are going to have to go to the document. We really are going to have to go to the document, because it's interesting. And please note, before we get into this too much, it should be realised that they are talking about 2040 as their vision. 2040. 15 years away. So their plan is for 15 years in the future. Or, let's see, 2029, 2034, 2039, potentially free parliaments and potentially free governments away. We'll see. There are some very good graphics though in here. This one is a particularly interesting one. 70% of UK's gas imports in 2021 came from Norway. 95% of global data is carried by undersea cables. The UK relies on imports for 46% of its food. And the UK's demand for critical minerals like lithium, graphite, cobalt and nickel depends on intricate global supply chains. All true. All true. North Sea pipelines, undersea fibre optic cables. All important things going by the sea. They even have a discussion of the defence overseas footprint and critical defence positions which should be covered. You would think by security, sovereign bases areas: Cyprus, Gibraltar, Germany, Oman, Kenya, Singapore. You'd think, and other scenarios like that. You think they'd have a lot of protection for them as they are critical defence hubs according to the defence overseas footprint. You think. One of the fun things when you get to page 103 is in the recommendations they've got to avoid costs of the past. The government must commit to not extending the life of the Dreadnought class submarines beyond their intended end of service dates from the mid-2050s. It should start to define the requirement of the post-Dreadnought nuclear deterrent within this Parliament. Mid-2050s. Well, 2026. Just had an election in 2024. We've got another one in 2029, 2034, 2039... 2044, 2049, probably 2054? I mean, they're adventurous to think they can define things 6 parliaments away. It's worthwhile looking into. I agree it needs to be looked into, but there is part of me sitting here going, we haven't been able to define stuff and keep consistent development on things from one parliament to the next. You want to do stuff over 6 parliaments away? I mean, good luck. Now we get to the maritime domain, though, and this is the section I wanted to talk through, because maritime security is a strategic imperative for the UK. Oh, cool. Global trade, undersea pipelines and data cables, and offshore energy installations are critical for sustaining daily national life. Okay. Alright. However, the maritime domain is increasingly vulnerable. Technological change and proliferation of advanced conventional weapons pose increasing threats to maritime security, whilst adversaries are more willing to threaten the free flow of critical commodities, such as food and energy, to hold the UK and its allies at risk. I mean, the experiences of World War I and World War II must be completely random bits of history. I mean, it's never happened to the UK before. And Napoleonic Wars. I mean, this is just so unexpected. Where has this come from? Where has this risk appeared from? What has happened to the world that it suddenly appeared? I mean, you know, the Cold War, when the Soviets kept talking about using their nuclear submarines to block off convoys across the Atlantic. All these things. It just randomly appeared. The Royal Navy must be prepared to deter maritime incidents similar to the sabotage of Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline and the cutting of undersea data cables in the UK and international waters. The Navy must also be prepared for new geographical realities created by climate change, with the high north becoming more important to the UK as NATO allies becomes more accessible. To meet the demands of a new era of threat, the Royal Navy must fulfill new roles and continue to evolve how it fights. I mean, like anti-submarine warfare? I mean, that's such a new role. Moving towards a dynamic mix of crewed and uncrewed and increasingly autonomous surface and subsurface vessels and aircraft, and developing next-generation capabilities such as SSN attack submarines via the trilateral AUKUS partnership. I mean, all those nuclear attack submarines we've had in the past, including, of course, Conqueror, which famously sank a World War II vintage cruiser in the Falklands War. It's such a strange thing to find ourselves developing them. Realistically, it's true. It should be involved, and we do need to develop these assets. We do need to keep putting in money and funding. But realistically, also the reason we're in this trouble is because we kept fudging the numbers, and now now we need help. We've got the infrastructure. It's strange enough in nuclear, it's one of the areas where we have got the infrastructure industry capable of building it. We just haven't been putting in enough funding, so to actually get something built on time, we either need to put in a load of money ourselves or find someone else to put some money in. Hello, Australia. We love you. We do. Very nice happy wave going on. And it's kind of interesting, because we've got surplus infrastructure industry for this, because we haven't been building to our maximum capability, because everything was designed on the idea of us having 12 SSNs in service and maintaining them, and as well as 4 strategic boats, and we haven't, because we've been sure that we could do more with less. Okay, so it starts off with a continuous at sea deterrence. That's fine. Better defend deter and defend in the Euro-Atlantic. Contributing to NATO... Didn't we used to call that Mediterranean, Baltic and Atlantic? But okay, fine, we're now calling it the Euro-Atlantic. Why? Contributing to NATO regional plans through the provision of continuous at sea deterrence, 5th generation carrier strike capability. Okay, maybe get some more squadrons of F-35s then. Just because it's available now, we actually know how to use it. Just Order them. There's a production line going. Just order some aircraft. We'll focus on securing North Atlantic through its Atlantic Bastion Plan. Oh, great, a Bastion Plan. It used to always be the Soviets who were obsessed with bastions, and bastions at sea, with a lot of doctrinal history of them obsessing on them, and basically NATO spent its entire time working out how to go through them, into them, and smash them up. And was very, very confident of being able to do so by the end of the Cold War. And now we're going for bastions. Littoral Strike and Type 45 destroyers providing integrated air and missile defense. Again, by the way, I'm sure this one, like the previous one, will talked about fitting the Type 45s with ballistic missile defense capabilities. And I will again remind you that they have filled the hole which was able to take strategic length VLS cells with Sea Scepter missiles in what are considered point defense cells. Also, we only have 6 of these assets, and they're being overused and under-supported as it is. If someone announces we are going to be getting rid of any of them before the Type 83s enter service, I'm not saying I'll be marching on Parliament, but I will be crowing very loudly and shouting something very obscene, probably in Parliamentary Square. Something which my mother would be very upset with me shouting and actually using in public. But they will deserve it. Because literally every single time they write one of these reports, they write how critical and important these things are, and then they don't friggin' buy them. Shape the global security environment, using defense levers where the Navy can deliver the greatest effect, including capability partnerships, exports, training, education. Anyone mentioning diplomacy here? Any mention of diplomacy? I'm just looking for some diplomacy, which is what navies are very good at. They go around, they say hi to people, they do diplomacy. Diplomacy, presence. I can't see those words anywhere. Maybe they'll be in the next one, but I'm trying to avoid this box currently. This multi-domain integration action Atlantic Bastion. I'm trying to avoid it. The Royal Navy will deploy a Type 26 anti-submarine warfare frigate force equipped with mission bays to facilitate it. We're only buying 8 of them, and you're selling some to the Norwegians and delaying our procurement. Please, you're making the cornerstone of your defence plan, and you are actually cutting your own defence plan as we speak. Yes, you're still promising to get 8, but you're actually taking ships which were being built for the Royal Navy and giving to the Norwegians, and then turn around and go, no, don't worry, Norway will join our force structure for doing this. They won't put their own criteria needs before ours. They will come to our help, which I'm sure the Norwegians will promise to do so. But at the moment they have their own issues, they will put their ships to their own issues first. Because that's what happens in national security. It's about your own nation, not the next door one. I know, it's lovely on paper, it's a lovely theoretical, but it's not the reality. Reality is, if they have them, great. And you might be able to call on one if it's available to back you out, to backfill up your force. And that'll be really useful. But don't count them as substituting for your force in your own national security doctrine and paper. Because you're basically blatantly going, we have to do this, and to do this, we can only do this if these people, who are not part of our force structure, are coming to help us. Because also, Norway could have a change of government. They could elect a complete pacifist who doesn't want to get involved in the North Atlantic, who wants to leave NATO entirely. Stranger things have happened. Or they could elect someone who believes that they need to, I don't know, conquer the Shetland Islands, and we could have a really tenuous relationship with them. You don't know what's going to happen over the next 10, 20, 30 years' time. So, when you're building assets which are going to be your core force structure for those 10, 20, 30 years, you don't go, I'm going to depend on someone else's force structure. Or even more likely, they might have someone who comes in and goes, oh, economically, do we need 4 of these assets? Because they've already cut from 5 down to 4. They might go, oh, we can cut to 3. And then suddenly, that's a hole in your force structure that you can't fill, unless you build your own. The Royal Navy must continue to move towards a more powerful but cheaper and simpler fleet, and developing a high-low mix of equipment and weapons that exploits autonomy and digital integration. Carrier strike is already at the cutting edge of NATO capability. Cutting edge of capability, yes. When you have enough force there to actually deliver it. But more rapid progress is needed to its evolution into hybrid carrier wings, whereby crewed combat aircraft, F-35Bs, are complemented by autonomous and collaborative platforms in the air and expendable, single-use drones. Plans for the hybrid carrier wing should also include long-range precision missiles capable of being fired from the carrier deck. What kind of drugs are you on when writing this? And I ask this in all seriousness. One of the rules of operating a carrier is thou shalt not put foot on thou's deck. You do not put debris onto your deck. Why are you launching missiles from your carrier? You have escorts. You have other warships in your battle group to launch missiles. Your carrier is about launching and recovering aircraft. Missiles, you have a VLS, hopefully a Mark 41 VLS or something else of strategic length, sitting on a escort away from the carrier so no debris goes on your flight deck and blocks it up for flight operations, and you launch. And from them, okay, you launch from them. I don't know why this is so hard to work out. But it really is, it appears to be. You do not want to put a missile launch capability on your flight deck. The Americans don't put a missile launch capability on their flight deck. They stick it below level so it fires from below the flight deck and hopefully doesn't put any thought on that. They still worry about it. The French don't. The Chinese don't. The Indians don't. The Russians do, but no one really considers them a model of carrier operations to follow. I mean, seriously, this is a very Russian-inspired paper. This is like people who've been reading Russian doctrine thinking, that's a good idea. Bastions. That's a great idea. Missiles launching from our flight deck. No. The only good thing about that is, judging by the speed at which we seem to change over governments currently and change over defense ministers, it hopefully will not survive to actually adoption and actual integration into the force structure. Someone will hopefully come along who goes, no, that's a really stupid idea, let's get rid of that one. This is why we have surface ships. This is why we have the escort strength. Admittedly, though, they've been cutting that, so yeah. That might be annoying. Is this the reason why they're putting it? Because they're trying to get they're trying to still have VLS cells even when they've got rid of the escorts. I hope not, because that is seriously what they're doing. Then they are seriously hurting themselves. Amphibious advanced force operations remain a critical force of the Royal Marine Commando Force, operating in some of the most extreme environments and offering political choice for action worldwide. These operations should increasingly focus on support of NATO requirements, including integration into the UK-led Strategic Reserve Corps when appropriate. By the way, brigade strength organisation would be really useful for that. To maximise the UK's warfighting capabilities, the Royal Navy should explore alternative approaches to delivering a balanced and cost-effective fleet. This may include using commercial vessels and burden sharing with NATO allies to augment the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, Fleet Service Support ships, which haven't even been delivered yet in non-contested environments. The dedicated professional seafarers and the ships of the RFA underpin the Royal Navy's vital operational outputs throughout the provision of logistics, aviation and medical support, yet they're asking for a pay rise, and they seem to not be getting it. In fact, the government seems to be permanently trying to cut them down. The RFA seem to be the ones who are suffering most currently under the current government's views on defence. Its unique capability to sustain continuous at-sea deterrence, carrier strike, and amphibious operations, and make a critical contribution to homeland resilience. These must be maintained. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's what I'd judge them by when we consider it. But let's look at the recommendations, shall we? Let's see how depressing they can find them. The Royal Navy must play a new leading and coordinating role in securing UK's critical undersea infrastructure and maritime traffic that is vital to daily national life. As part of this, the Royal Navy must work with wider government and commercial partners to develop enhanced maritime surveillance through existing and novel capabilities. Okay, that's a bunch of words. The 37. The Royal Navy must continue its transformation in skills, equipment and ways of operating needed for the 21st century maritime domain as part of an integrated force. This should include moving to a hybrid carrier wing, because we're not buying enough F-35Bs, comprising crew combat aircraft, autonomous collaborative platforms in the air, single-use drones, and eventually, please don't do this, long-range missiles capable of being fired from the carrier deck. Why do that to me? Why would you do that to me? Okay, there are many, many better ways of launching missiles than firing them from, I presume, some sort of MLRS-style vehicle from a carrier deck. Also, by the way, such a vehicle will take up space in the hangar, which means you'll be able to carry less aircraft. And it'll require maintenance, and it'll require organisation, and why are you doing this to me? Just... seriously, if you really want to want to do a cheap methodology, buy containerized missiles and hire a frigating container ship to launch them off. There are pictures. The Chinese are doing this. It's a terribly inefficient design when it comes to actual force strength and force generation, but go for it. Don't put missiles on my carrier flight decks. And I know they're not mine, but they are mine. I'm one of the British taxpayers. We all own them. Ay, caramba. Rapid evolution of anti-submarine warfare through the integration of underwater, surface and airborne drones, including Protector, with Type 26 frigates, P-8 maritime patrol aircraft, and SSN attack submarines. They don't realise SSN's... No, I'm not getting there. The fact that they've used basically the equivalent of attack submarine, we'll leave that to one side. So, Type... At least it's not combat-ready aircraft, combat-ready fast jets. I suppose at least it's not combat-ready fast jets. Oh God, Lord help me. This is a very depressing thing to read through and all this stuff on. I'm hoping people are finding this video useful, because it has taken years off my life. In terms of the depression it's brought about. Rapid evolution of mine hunting to be delivered to autonomous platforms. Again, okay, lovely, but you actually need some platforms in the first place to deliver it from. Exploring possible development from a Type 45 destroyer to a minimally crewed or autonomous air dominance system that would integrate directed energy weapons and enable... Oh, Lord. They're turning Type 83s into something weird. Again, likely it won't survive, and likely, in nicest way, this is just a load of bump to put off actually developing and making a decision. Minimally crewed or autonomous air defense dominant system. Oh, good Lord. It's a buzzword bonanza. Look, as I've said before on this channel many times, I am fairly certain we will end up with roughly 2,000-ton autonomous ships, autonomous vessels, which will be basically missile barges, which will be on, occasionally, towed or soda those sort of things, to support our task groups. But I'm fairly certain for every one of those ships, or probably two, or maybe two or three, you will have, at the center of this task group, you will have a crewed asset, which will probably have to be quite large, have quite a large crew on it, because it'll have to maintain helicopters to wander out to the uncrewed assets and do maintenance, especially when they're at sea. And it'll have to have its own missiles and its own systems to defend itself. And what you'll probably end up with is a couple of those groups, and a couple of ASW groups, a couple of air defense groups, a couple of ASW groups, joining onto a carrier, and with supply ships, and that's your task force. And basically what that means is the modern frigates and the modern destroyers take the role of cruisers in the World War II amphibious task group, and the uncrewed assets take the role of frigates, destroyers and sloops, and corvettes as well, in the World War II era task groups to provide the massive numbers. That is what's more than likely the sensible operation that's going to come from this in the end, if we do go down a sensible path. One of the reasons I say this is because when you look into it and start talking about, oh, we'll use satellite control from the UK, you'll need to launch a lot more satellites. And satellites are not as safe and secure as they used to be. And so if you're in a scenario where your satellite comms has gone down and suddenly you can't control all your forces, then your forces get wiped out and you lost. You lost badly. And are you really wishing to put your national security in such a scenario where that can happen? Whereas if you have a crewed ship nearby which coordinates them, which whilst as well as having satellite links also has maybe a direct laser link with them, and maybe in a scenario of if the satellites go down, aim for where the crewed ship is supposed to be and get within the signal range of that as an operating criteria, then suddenly things work a lot better. And yes, you're going to need to work on your laser links, and yes, you're probably going to have to work on some sort of uncrewed aviation vehicle which can provide some form of communications transfer and communications fill in if satellites are down. But again, that's going to have a limited capability. It's going to only have so much bandwidth, only going to be able to do so much communication. And it's also going to be, like most communications nodes, a target. Because just look at what's happening currently in the time period we're talking about. We're in March 2026. When we've got war fighting going on, what does what do you first seek to do? Take down the communications nodes, because then you can stop the commanders talking to the shooters, talking to the targeters. If you take down a comms node, that's the single point of weakness. It stops the communication. Then you take out the shooters, and then you try and track down the targeters and take out the command structure, and then you did the whole force. More flexible regulation is needed to enable experimentation areas such as autonomy. Oh, that sounds great. Especially when you already consider our satellite-based communication system is called Skynet. There are things I don't want to read in a British government defence document at this current time. And then point 40. The Royal Navy should explore alternative approaches to augmenting the Royal Fleet Auxiliary to deliver a balanced, cost-effective fleet. Oh, again, it's with the cost-effective. This phrase turns up so often. Balanced with cost. Then maximise the UK's warfighting capabilities. This may include using commercial vessels and burden-sharing capabilities of allies to augment assets such as fleet-solid support ships in non-contested environments. Well, sharing with allies, of course, because they won't be already using their ships for something. And commercial vessels, because it's well known that commercial owners of ships like to send their ships into war zones to actively be engaging in what is war roles of supplying warships. So making them not just a target opportunity, but an active target to seek out, because, let's be honest, you want to sink the supply ship. That stops the fleet from working. I would love to say that finishes the depression session of the 2025 review, but it doesn't. It does not. What comes next is elsewhere in the document, and it's some of the slides, but figure 5, market segmentation for smarter procurement. Major modular platforms, all these things that they're talking about, that the major modular platforms, they're 2 years, target to the first contract, pace setting, spiral and modular upgrades, 1 year to first contract, and rapid commercial exploitation, 3-month cycles. It's all about the money. And it's all about the integrated force, which is because of joint force, which was an earlier one, wasn't enough, and it's not rehashing of the future force, of course, or network enabled capability. It's something different. The idea is the force is going to be integrated together. It's going to work together. That you're going to have multiple potential shooters, multiple potential sensors, and everyone's going to work together and integrate together, and that's going to allow you to do more with less. Okay, let's move on to the summary. Let's get on to the end of this. So I don't think this is going to manage to get on the 4th of March. I wish it would, but I don't think it is, which means I'm going to delay it till the Saturday. Because usually you get most people able to view on either a Wednesday or a Saturday. So I'm going to schedule it for the Saturday, make sure it's visible coming. Make sure it's got a bit of advertisement coming up for it, because I want it to be watched. And that's not just because it is already over 210 minutes long and I'm still going. It's also because, during the time of recording this, I have had so many issues with the house, it's been absurd. And my poor mum also had another nosebleed, so that was another quick wander to medical facilities. It's been fun. House renovations are fun. Whoever had the bright idea in this family of, why don't we buy a house together and I'll live, which has an annex, so I can live in the annex. And you guys can live in the main house, and therefore I'm there if you need help. Really, really wasn't thinking sensibly long term. And he just spent the last 210 minutes critiquing governments for not thinking long term. But it is better for the family. It is. But this is the problem we've had. I hope this has illustrated just how frenetic UK defence policy has been for the last 29 years. It really has been. And I don't see it getting any better anytime soon. People keep trying to think of persons to blame over this. And really there are so many of them. There just is. It's not a single individual, it's not a single anything. And it's certainly not a conspiracy. Unless it's a conspiracy of politicians to try and get re-elected by putting the funding into things they think will get themselves elected, and therefore ignoring the things which they don't think matter for that purpose. That's not so much a conspiracy. A conspiracy has a plan. That's more a dereliction of duty, I suppose. But that's the reality of what we've had to deal with. Every single time I've been talking about procurement, I've done videos about procurement recently, and etc. things that I've gone with. First question before you procure anything, you have to ask, who are you? What is your national needs? Then you have to assess your risks, and then you have to assess your threats. Risks are constant. Are you an island nation? Therefore, are you likely to be? Are you therefore at threat of being blockaded by the sea? Therefore, you need to maintain some ability to intercede with your sea lines of communication and protect the movement of goods. You know, those sort of things. Those are risks which are permanent. And then you have to assess your threats. Okay, which nations look scary to you at the moment? Where are they? Are they close to any risks, or are they far from risks? If they're far from your risks, then you need to keep an eye on them and watch them, but probably you don't need to worry about too much. If they're close to things which are risk, then that's going to mean you're going to have to ump that area in terms of the spending. But the risks are constant. They're the forces you need to keep constant to maintain coverage of those risks. We haven't done that. And I'm not sure we can do that under the current system. I would love it to be able to be done on the current system. I am someone who actually likes parliamentary democracy. I think it's a good idea. I like the constituency link. I like the connection it gives to constituencies and to the public. I like that you know who's accountable, you know who your MP is, you know who's responsible to you. But I think one of the troubles we have is that they have used the length of procurement of systems instead of thinking, okay, we need to be careful and we need to find a way to manage this in almost a cross-party manner. They use the length of the procurement to promise jam tomorrow while they make cuts today to fund what they want to fund, knowing that they won't be responsible for cutting that jam. It'll be the next person's job. The next person will cut that jam. So you can promise anything. This is why I find it so annoying when people talk about, there is this much money unfunded in the defence procurement. It's the MOD's fault. No, it's not. It's not the MOD which decides what's being procured. They make recommendations. It's the politicians who do above them. And it's not the Treasury which decides how much funding they're getting. It is the politicians above them. That is what we have elected representatives for. And if it is the elected representatives are saying, oh no, it's Treasury, if the elected representatives are being told what to do by the Treasury Department, then that's a problem. Because they're elected to be the bosses of the Treasury. And might I suggest they start firing the people who aren't listening to them? Because those people aren't following the democratic guidelines of they're the elected bosses. But in some ways, recently, in the UK, the Treasury has been turned into the European Union. It always used to be that the UK, every time a British politician didn't want to do something, they'd blame it on the European Union. They'd say they couldn't because of the European Union rules. And then they were so surprised when people voted to leave the European Union. When for years, every politician of every colour, every stripe, every creed had used the same excuse every time the public had wanted something done and they hadn't wanted to do it. Or they'd promised something to the public and then found they couldn't deliver it. It was a complete shock. There's so many reasons put forward as to why the British public voted that way, but I'm fairly certain, because I've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people from the British public over the years for various reasons. I was even a borough councillor myself a long time ago. That the vast majority who voted to leave the European Union were doing it in many ways to stop giving the politicians the options, the UK politicians, of blaming the European Union for not delivering on their electoral promises. Now they blame the Treasury. They've turned it into the EU. And that's not sensible. I suppose it saves them being honest and admitting that they've managed to make a mistake, because apparently these days you can't ever admit to making a mistake. But that's not a way to govern a country. And when it comes to defence, that's particularly problematic. So what are we going to do? Well, my thinking is this. For defence, it might be sensible that we start making the policy made by the Defence Select Committee. We have the chair of the Select Committee is appointed every parliamentary term by vote from Parliament. They can choose who it is and who it isn't. So the MPs vote to be who. And the Defence Select Committee then writes the report which sets out Britain's needs in a cross-party manner. And instead of the things like the Strategic Defence Reviews or Strategic Defence and Security Reviews being produced by government, they are produced by the Defence Select Committee. And maybe the Foreign Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee as well puts involved in it. And they produce the report. It's then voted through and accepted by Parliament. And if it's accepted, then the procurement plan of that is implemented by the government. The government is in charge of operational use and all those things. It still maintains that. But they have to implement a procurement plan which is made by Parliament. That's the only way I could see getting it on a long-term basis. And actually getting things thought through. Because suddenly, the people voting for it, everyone's voting it through. So everyone's responsible. No one can sit there and go, oh, that was the previous government's promise. No. And it might have been the previous Parliament's promise. But if you're going to change it, you have to all vote it through. And you have to all agree it. And you have to take responsibility for it. I don't know. I'd love to hear your ideas. I always finish my videos with a question, and that's the question today. What would you do? How would you make this so that instead of them keep promising in these documents, we're going to deliver this in 10, 15 years' time, when they're not around for even 5 years, and so they don't have to deliver their promises? How do you make it so that things actually have to be delivered? Well, that being said, what else have we got coming up? Well, this week it was delayed, and it was delayed because I was recording this as well, is the Adriatic Mortal Kombat video. That's probably going to come out on Friday now. This video might well come out on Saturday, so it might have already come out. But if you want to hear about what the Austro-Hungarian Destroyers World War I got up to, that will have been out this week. And I think the video on Thursday, the live video on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, and he's just frantically checking to see what's scheduled for Thursday, is what if the Royal Navy's aircraft carrier HMS Hermes had sisters in the 1920s? That's a patron live. That is a patron suggested topic. And with that being said, there is the patron vote for May is live now. And there's some interesting ideas up there. And that's basically how this channel is funded. Patreon. So thank you for your support. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. And I tried to stick to history as this channel, but my PhD is war studies. And I do teach and have taught always consistently right up to the present day. So I don't mind getting involved in the modern stuff, but with various criteria which I've explained in other videos. Basically, this channel is not War Thunder. If it's not the publicly available information about something, I'm not going to give any other information about something. Because I'm not War Thunder. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.